This story begins when one fine evening, in one dark and gloomy alleyway, a woman's scream was heard. The defenseless girl screamed for him to stop approaching her. She yelled at him and asked him what he was doing. They had just met for the first time and he had already started to spread his arms. Nasty little man smirked, told her she knew what he was doing. He was going to get a hotel room for the two of them. She yelled at the nasty bastard to get away from her and swung her purse at him. But the man took her hand lightly and stopped her desperate thrust. The man said that for her sake, he even used the high-speed railroad to come to her so far away, and he couldn't leave without doing something. Before he could get enough of the foreboding caresses, someone behind him yelled for the man to stop. Some man behind him was yelling at him. How could he forcibly kidnap a girl in broad daylight? A stranger of extraordinary beauty appeared right in front of them and was not afraid to help the innocent girl. The man was temporarily numb and didn't know how to react. The girl couldn't believe her eyes that someone was actually going to help her in such a terrible situation. His face was serious and his gaze was sharp. His hair was silky white and his fist was tightly clenched. It was him, the most handsome guy on the whole street. And coincidentally, the protagonist of this story, Fan Ning. This was actually his real appearance. This is what he really looked like. But for some reason, his body became what you see it now. A major event in his life happened just recently. 24 hours ago, a shooting star flew right over his town. All the people on the street were happily watching the shooting star. And of course, it was the most perfect moment for making wishes. A shooting star is a unique, rare event that not everyone can see at least once in a lifetime. The star was falling, but the life of the ordinary did not stop. Fan Ning finished his favorite instant noodles with great pleasure. He was in a great hurry to grab a snack, for he needed to get back into the game as quickly as possible in order not to let his allies down. People on social media wrote about the shooting star and cheered its appearance. But Fan Ning had his own opinion on everything that was going on. He wrote comments and asked for an end to this bickering, for it was a clear sign of the activation of his personal system, which had been lying dormant for 28 years. After posting the comment, something strange started happening right behind her. The coffee cup, along with the table, began to vibrate and shake vigorously, and the computer desk suddenly started to move around. Fan Ning didn't understand what the heck was starting to happen around him. Perhaps it was an earthquake. Fan Ning was scared and didn't know what to do. Before he could get up from the chair, that same chair, under the impact of the tremors, hit Fan Ning hard. He smacked his head hard right on the wooden table, so much so that quite a bit of blood came out from behind his face. But he still had his wits about him, deflected his head and tried to get up from the table. Falling off the table, he was most worried about his laptop. He reached for it, but couldn't touch it. His body stopped obeying, and gradually his consciousness faded away. He lost consciousness and was lying on the floor of his house. Meanwhile, people wrote strange things in the comments. Some started vomiting water, some started breathing fire, and some started seeing ghosts. At that instant, a notification appeared that the system had been activated. Another bright sunny morning came, and our protagonist had no trouble waking up. His head hurt a lot, and with it his whole body. He tried to remember everything. He wasn't bleeding anymore, and he thought he was dreaming. The first thing he wanted to do was check to see if his precious laptop was damaged. He reached for it with his hand, but he couldn't move a step farther. He didn't realize what was happening to him. He couldn't move at all. He thought it must still be a dream, and somehow he was still asleep. But Fan Ning realized what was wrong. He abruptly remembered about activating his system. Fan Ning rejoiced, as this was definitely not a dream. Now he would have his own system. Thanks to his system, he had already foreshadowed his successful future, namely lots of money, beauties, popularity, saving lives. Finally, his time had come. And it went away immediately. The system found an untreatable, incurable disease. He yelled at the system and said it was bullshit. How could he have an incurable disease if he keeps getting annual checkups? Disease analysis has been completed. He was found to have severe stage 4 procrastination. It was confirmed that no treatment was possible for the survival of the system, and host capture was immediately initiated. Immediately after the message, the seizure of Fan Ning's body began. His creation completely passed into some invisible space. He found himself in a place he had never seen before, a place he could freely feel with his body. He had no choice but to shout loudly to the entire room he suddenly found himself in. Looks like his body has indeed been taken over by the system. He didn't deny that he was a rather lazy man. He would never get a haircut until his hair grew to his chin. And he only did laundry when he ran out of clean clothes. He would take all his socks, t-shirts, windbreakers, sneakers, and stuff them all into the washing machine at once. The room that was created had a screen that said it was no longer just laziness, but exceptional laziness. Fan Ning objected that it couldn't be exceptional laziness after all. He hadn't even hit the internet news sites yet. The system wrote to him that he was a pretty good-looking guy, but for some unknown reason, he had been single for ages. The system asked if he had any common sense left. Fan Ning was saying something should not justify her independent taking away of his body that he had been using for 20 years. He was in charge of his body, and he wasn't going to let anyone take it away. Concentrating, he strained his consciousness as much as possible, and with all his might he tried to command his body. But he failed. There were no organs left in his body that he could freely command. He could only think, hear, and see. The system activated a full capture procedure. The system thought processes were initiated. Fang Ning himself was strongly opposed to this coup, and demanded that the system return his body. First, the system decided to clean up its habitat. Fan Ning watched his body, and couldn't believe that the system had actually scheduled a spring cleaning first. His body mechanically started a major cleaning of his house. Every surface of his house was cleaned to a shine. And Fang Ning himself kept demanding his body back. Time passed very quickly, and it was late night. Fang Ning couldn't believe his eyes. The first thing he did was to clean up well. Suddenly, after cleaning up, the system started putting on shoes and going somewhere. The system wrote that the host's physical fitness is extremely poor. The system decided to go for a night run. A familiar girl walked into his house and asked Fang Ning what kind of miracle had just happened. She wondered where he got the time to be so diligent and keep the house absolutely clean. The system looked silently at the girl who walked in. The NPC tries to establish a conversation with the host. The system asks you to select one of the dialogue options. Option 1. You smirk and ask how rare it is. Option 2. You reply with contempt, none of your business. And Option 3. You give her a cold stare and walk away without answering her. Fang Ning sincerely hoped that this wasn't all serious. Fang Ning began to think about what he should choose. The first one is an act that only a fictional character could do, and the second is an act that is just plain annoying. The third one was the most normal, but he didn't know how to act with a cold stare. Still, he chose the third one. The girl stood awkwardly in the hallway, waiting for his answer. But there was no response. Fang Ning gave the coldest and most romantic look he could muster, and it worked the best. The girl thought that Fang Ning had read too many novels. Fang Ning silently walked past her and left the house. She wondered where he could have gone in the middle of the night. At that moment, a new message came through on her phone. She was texted by a man who called her dear, and said he would be there soon with a bouquet of roses. The girl didn't care about poor boys, because she already had a rich man of her own. She wrote him that he was nice, that she would be there soon. The system really controls the body went out for a night jog. But because of Fang Ning's weak body, the run didn't last long. The system has reached its fatigue limit. The system decides to end the run and take a break. Fang Ning thought that he had done more exercise today than he had done in many months. After regaining her fitness with a slight increase in health, the system began to think about her next move. The system has decided to restore justice. From such an unexpected message, Fang Ning didn't just flinch, but abruptly stood up and was surprised. Although Fang Ning's body is tired after running, but to restore justice, the system will always find strength. The system abruptly ran towards the danger. Fang Ning asked her why she was so eager to bring justice. Does the system know martial arts? Fang Ning asked her not to run away, but to explain to him what the heck had started happening. His body opened a second breath and ran at a speed that Fang Ning had never run before. The system masterfully ran away from all obstacles and strove forward. The system stopped and activated a tenfold magnification of vision. Fan Ning saw a certain man right on the Wednesday of the street harassing a defenseless girl. It was Zhao Ying, the same girl who came to visit him the other day. The guy tensed up when he saw how big the man was, and asked the system if he should be the same. Fang Ning tried to convince the system that this man was too strong an opponent for them, but it was as if the system wasn't listening. After listening to the owner of the body, the system concluded that he was right, and began to think of a solution. After carefully analyzing all the options, she decided to use the transformation, and the boy stepped onto the fence. As the guy flew towards the couple, his body began to transform. And Fan Ning was surprised that he was listened to. The system didn't say anything back to the guy, but his body was rapidly changing beyond recognition. He now looked like a cultivator. He had long white hair that developed while in the air. He finally landed elegantly on the ground, and it was as if his whole body was studying the force. After landing successfully, Fan Ning stood up straight and loudly ordered the man to stop. These words caught the attention of both the man and the girl, and they both looked at the stranger in surprise. The man let go of the girl and looked irritatedly at the guy, and Fan Ning asked how dare he rob a woman. The boy's face was full of anger, and he angrily asked the man what he was guilty of. The man stared silently at the guy in front of him for a while, trying to figure out what had happened. When the realization of the situation finally came to him, the man started laughing very loudly at the guy. He kept laughing and pointing his finger at the blonde guy. The man called the guy a psychopath who dressed up to scare people. The man was so funny that he had to squat down to calm down, and the girl thought it was filming. Fang Ning was frustrated that this time the system didn't give him a choice and persistently got him into trouble. The man finally got serious and told the guy to go about his business. He took a knife out of his pocket and started threatening the guy with it. The girl was frightened when she realized what was going on. The man started running at the guy with a knife in his hand. He was screaming that he was going to kill him. When he got close enough to the blonde man, he made a leap, about to strike from above. The girl who remained standing behind was greatly frightened for the stranger and screamed. Fang Ning looked at the approaching knife blade and also cried out in fear. But his body remained calm. So when the man was close enough, the system started throwing punches, fending off the attack. The guy then gave the man a strong, attacking blow with the palm of his hand to the center of his chest. That pushed the man back a little, and the guy concentrated the energy in his palm and prepared to strike next. And the man with the knife was thrown at high speed over a great distance. After the man's body touched the floor, he hit his head on the fence and a knife flew out of his hand. The man's whole body trembled. He touched his chest and tried to turn to the boy. But he failed, because the hand he was about to point at him began to weaken rapidly. Soon his strength completely left him, and everything began to blur in front of his eyes. And the man finally fell to the floor not far from the knife he had recently attacked the guy with. The system had won this fight, and now the guy was staring silently at the losing man. Fan Ning watched what was happening through the screen and noticed that the system was too ruthless and used the ancient hero style. The guy was very enthusiastic, and he also really wanted to be able to fight as well as the system. The system gave the guy a clear report about the fight, and Fang Ning began to read it carefully. At the end of the report, it said that Wang Hongdae had been killed, and the system gained 100 experience points for it. Fang Ning felt an unpleasant feeling begin to spread inside his body when he saw that the man had been killed. The guy realized that the system owning his body had killed a person in real life. The guy's attention from these unpleasant thoughts was distracted by the sound of camera clicks. Zhao Ying was actively taking photos of the guy who saved her, constantly changing angles. The girl also didn't forget to take selfies with the blonde man in front of her. Fang Ning felt uncomfortable because of this. The system didn't pay attention to Zhao Ying's actions at all, and while the girl was looking at the photos, the system turned away from her. And with confident steps, she began to approach her defeated opponent. Fang Ning watched her actions in surprise. The guy asked the system to use gloves if she wanted to touch a man. The system didn't reply anything to Fang Ning, but it seemed like she was pondering his words. Guy's body began to examine and search the man to see if he had anything useful. Fan Ning was surprised to see that, in order to do so, the blonde man's hands were covered in something like ice. After searching the body, the system sent Fang Ning a report of the findings. 4,200 and 250 yuan was found. The guy was happy about this because he only had 850 yuan on his card, and with that money, it was much easier for him. The system was the first in his life to take care of his food, house, and clothes. It was also the first to give him money. Fang Ning relaxedly lay down and began to enjoy this unfamiliar feeling of someone taking care of him. After that, the system alerted the guy that it was going to try to comfort the girl, and Fang Ning was offered 3 options. The guy felt he was in a quandary again because the 2 options started the conversation about payment. Fang Ning decided that he definitely wouldn't ask for money, so the first 2 options were definitely not suitable. There was a final 3rd option left, and the guy ordered the system to act on that scenario. So the blonde headed over to the girl, who was looking at something on her phone screen with a satisfied face. The guy stopped not far from the girl, and Fan Ning began to wonder if the girl was in shock. He told the system that the girl was just sitting on her phone and not in shock. The blonde man stood silently for a while longer in front of Zhao Ying, who didn't take her gaze off the phone. The girl never paid any attention to him, and the system left the girl with a single jump. Zhao Ying has already posted a post with pictures of her rescuer and showed the man who attacked her. The girl was engrossed in the comments under her new post and replied to her followers. Zhao Ying was pleased with the amount of activity she had caused with her post. But then the girl got serious when she saw comments discussing the perpetrator. People noticed that the man didn't look like he had just been knocked out, and Zhao Ying felt herself becoming uncomfortable. The girl started to look around and only then noticed that the blonde was missing. Zhao Ying could feel her body trembling with fear, but she tried to keep her cool. So she began to slowly approach the man who still hadn't moved. The girl kept a small distance from him and began to hesitantly ask if he was okay. There was no reply from the criminal, and the girl saw his face up close. Zhao Ying was really scared and screamed because she realized that the commentators were right. Her scream was full of terror, and only a street lamp illuminated the situation in the middle of the dark street. The blonde had already jumped away from another building when the girl's scream finally sounded. Fang Ning noticed that they had run 200 meters, and the girl only now realized what had happened. The system continued to move away from the scene, and the guy offered to change his appearance so as not to attract attention. There was no response to his offer, and Fang Ning doubted that the system could even hear him. The blonde began to move closer to the ground as they reached the park where Fan Ning's training session ended. And the guy headed for the ground, even though there were branches from the trees ahead. After the guy was on the ground, he was hidden behind bushes and a glow reappeared around him. Fang Ning's body took on its usual appearance. A leaf clung to his lips. It was already deep into the night when Fang Ning and the system finally went home. The guy got to his apartment and opened the door to get in. After the guy was inside his apartment, he stopped to catch his breath. Fang Ning tried to understand how the system using his body was moving so fast. After all this tedium, the guy needed to head to the shower under the warm jets of water. His gym clothes had to go immediately to the dirty laundry drawer. The system turned off the water to properly shampoo her hair, and as the guy's body continued to wash away all the accumulated fatigue from the day, Fang Ning realized something important. Even though the guy still had no control over his own body, today hadn't come for nothing. Fang Ning recalled all the situations today where the system had heeded his advice. The guy got excited because it could mean that one day the system would give him the opportunity to dominate. After the system finished showering, she dressed the guy in clean house clothes. Fan Ning's body left the bathroom under the gaze of the guy himself. The system headed for the bed, and the guy decided that since it was bedtime, he needed to get his body back. He struggled to get the system's attention to himself and ordered it to stay awake. The system sat in the lotus pose and announced that it had decided to shut down. Fang Ning was angry that he was completely ignored from the loud sound of his fist hitting the fist beside him. The guy thought it was very cruel of the system to do this to him. But then something happened that he didn't expect at all. His whole body felt very strange. Fang Ning examined his body and felt the nutrients flowing through his stomach. A strong concentration of energy was also felt in his legs and arms. He could clearly feel the flow of energy in them. The guy could feel it flowing smoothly back and forth as if circulating through his body. He wondered what this aura was and why he couldn't realize it. He decided it was the system. Thus the aura grew stronger and stronger and enveloped his body with soft sensations. It was then that Fang Ning realized that this was the first time in his entire life that he felt so comfortable. His eyes slowly closed, and he thought he couldn't have used even a tenth of the aura himself. The guy decided he couldn't close his eyes for a minute, not even for a second. But Fang Ning's eyes continued to close despite this. And the guy was starting to fall asleep. In the end, he never managed to cope and accomplish what he had planned. Fang Ning fell into slumber. It was finally morning outside, and the sun's rays beautifully illuminated the houses and trees. The system that was still controlling the guy's body abruptly opened its eyes when it felt the sunlight on it. The guy spent the whole night in the lotus position. The system sat on the bed for a while longer and thought about what to do next. Then she left the bedroom and headed to the kitchen to look in the refrigerator. The system washed under running water all the necessary ingredients for cooking. She then carefully sliced the cucumbers and tomatoes into thin slices. The guy also put a skillet on the fire to get it ready to cook. The system decided to fry a glazed egg for breakfast. All her movements were confident dots. After a while, breakfast was ready and the table was completely covered. Fang Ning continued to sleep peacefully inside his body the entire time. His eyes only began to slowly open as the system finished preparing breakfast for his body. And all because he smelled a very delicious smell of food that beckoned the guy to him. Fan Ning watched his body eat breakfast and commented that the system made an excellent cook. The guy pondered how much money they could make per month if they utilized the system's culinary abilities, and decided that if they earned 50,000 yuan a month, you could open a store in a year and a half. The system finished eating breakfast and abruptly stood up, interrupting Fang Ning's musings because it hit him. Fang Ning complained that he was hurt. He asked if he couldn't stand up more carefully, but the system answered nothing, putting another batch of breakfast in the multi-cooker. After that, I covered it with the lid and put it on warming mode to keep the portion warm. Fan Ning remembered that he used to cook before, but then deliveries came up and he stopped doing it altogether. The guy felt uneasy when he realized that the only foods in the kitchen were those that belonged to Zhao Ying. The system froze in place, and Fan Ning stared at his body in surprise, trying to figure out what the system was up to this time. The system stood in front of the multi-cooker for a while it pondered the decision, and then said it was time to do it justice. Fang Ning wasn't happy about it, and tried to convince the system that going out after yesterday's events was not a good idea. However, the system didn't listen to him and headed into the hallway to put on her sneakers. She completely ignored all of Fan Ning's protesting cries. I opened the front door to leave the house. The guy yelled in the wake of the removing system that they now had the skills to make a lot of money, and was angry that they weren't using them, but also reminded the system that he had to go to work anyway. The man walked slowly through the empty parking lot and looked for a car to rob. The man spotted a black car in one of the parking lots and came closer. It was a fairly old man. His name was He Mingyi. He looked through the window of the selected car. This man gained the ability to control and create flames. He used it to light car windows on fire. And through the hole that turned out, he pulled out the things the drivers had put in, usually handbags. He Mingyi took out her purse from her bag and discovered a very small amount of money in there. The man was disappointed by this fact and simply threw the wallet away in an unknown direction. The 68,000 yuan he found was a mere pittance to the man and wasn't even worth the effort. He Mingyi continued to walk around the parking lot looking for a new target and stopped at another black car. In the interior of this car, he saw a luxury branded women's purse that clearly should have contained more money. The man was glad that he had managed to find something like this, and he was already anticipating taking a huge amount of money for himself. He used his flame power again, and was able to get his hand into the interior of the car. The man tried to grab the purse at once, but that was farther than he bargained for. Since the position he was in was not very comfortable, he had to find the right angle. He Ming-yi was very focused and made every effort to finally get his prize. And all his actions were successful because he was able to reach his purse after all. He took it in his hand and began to pull it out of the passenger compartment through the openings by which he had entered the auto. After that, He Ming-yi opened the purse and saw that it was full of money. He smiled contentedly as his expectations about this purse were fulfilled. Suddenly he heard someone ask if he was ashamed of doing such things. At first it scared the man, and he was going to leave the parking lot as soon as possible. But while he was running away, Yu decided to turn around to see who interrupted him. And what he saw made him stop and even shocked him a little. In front of him stood Feng Ning, who was in his battle mode. Hai Ming-yi looked very confident and admitted that the guy scared him at first. He paid the blonde man a caustic compliment and asked the guy in front of him if that was his purse. After that, He Ming-yi summoned his fire ability and said that he felt sorry for the guy. The fire covered the entire surface of the man's body as if they were one. He Ming-yi also let out fire from his mouth, and his eye admitted that he now had abilities. The man prepared for battle and gave the boy one last chance to walk away unharmed. Feng Ning watched and realized that he wasn't the only one who had been helped by the shooting star. The guy wanted to say something else to the system, but he was already moving forward. His body in this state was very fast and agile, and Fang Ming didn't even have time to realize what was happening. The blonde man moved very fast and was hard to spot. Fang Ming was scared for his life, while He Ming-yi watched his opponent's movements in shock. The next second, the blonde was behind the man. I prepared to strike. The guy was about to strike with the edge of his palm, and that was fast approaching his opponent. Since He Ming-yi was not prepared for such an attack, it easily reached its target. And that hard, concentrated blow to the back of the head was enough to bring the man down. Fan Ning watched as the system used the Dragon Flight-style skill to search the enemy. The guy in front of his face had a report on how the fight went. It turned out that Hai Ming-yi's important organs had been affected. With this battle, Fang Ning gained 500 experience points and 34,522 yuan. The system continued to search the man, and the guy realized she was referring to martial arts. Fang Ning thought that he was very lucky with this, but it would be better if he pretended like he didn't like it. His musings were interrupted by an alert. It said that the system had raised the level, and the host was getting 30 minutes of rest. But Fang Ning was not happy, but instead began to complain that the system was treating him like a prisoner. He kept yelling at the system in an attempt to get some sort of response, but it was all for naught. Therefore, Fang Ning realized that his idea of playing underdog was not a good idea. Since there was no point in pretending any longer, the boy plunged into the joyful anticipation of the future vacation. The system didn't wait for Fang Ning or somehow tell him about her plans. It began to prepare for the jump. She ignored the guy's question about where she was going and pushed herself off the ground hard. Since Feng Ning's body was in battle mode, it moved very fast and left the parking lot in one leap. The system was again in a hurry to distance itself from the scene and was bouncing between houses. The blonde man jumped over the fences with ease while maintaining great speed. After the system jumped the barrier, it needed a few more jumps, and she only stopped when she got to the designated spot. The place was a public restroom, and the system quietly went out of combat mode, returning the guy's normal body. Fang Ning's consciousness sat on the shoulder of his body as they returned home. The guy turned his attention to his watch and realized he had already missed work. He wasn't very happy about it because he would probably just get fired. Fang Ning's consciousness began to be surrounded by a glow, and his small figure began to disappear. The next moment, the guy was already in his body and had complete control over it. Fang Ning immediately noticed that his legs were more flexible and his body was much lighter than before. When the joy of these new sensations passed, he remembered that there was something he wanted to do. So struggling to call the system, he asked it to talk to him. She appeared in front of him in the form of a guy who appeared in battle mode. Feng Ning ordered the system to show him what she looked like. He asked to see the attribute panel, gifts, system backpack, and more. The guy smiled contentedly and patted himself on the chest. Once more, he ordered me to show him absolutely everything. The system didn't show him anything. It only told him that he had 28 minutes of rest. Feng Ning was infuriated by this, and he was even a little resentful of his system. The guy decided to demand to see at least the system backpack because there was definitely going to be one. After all, the stuff he gets has to be stored somewhere and then exchanged for money. The system had a very disgruntled look on its face. She was contemplating whether or not to show the guy. Ultimately, the decision was made in favor of the guy's wishes, and the system raised its hand. She snapped her fingers and the whole room was suddenly bathed in bright light. They were transported to a place where the things they had managed to get from the criminals were stored. Fang Ning began to look closer as the system continued to grudgingly follow him. The guy took the phone and told the system they might be able to sell it online. He wanted to tell her something else, but she turned away and said there was 21 minutes to rest. Fang Ning decided that his system didn't have a technology module, so was getting knowledge from his memory. The guy was sitting at his desk in front of which his adventure had begun. He turned on his laptop and it slowly downloaded all the files he needed. Fan Ning sat in his chair. He felt a little tired and realized that he hadn't logged on for a long time. He spent some more time waiting, looking at the things on his desk. Once the laptop was ready to use, Fang Ning began to quickly search for news. He found a link to a website where he could read the current news of his city. Fang Ning was tense and focused. He didn't know if he had expected to see himself there. And the first video that came to his attention was called Knight vs. Criminal, and he was in the lead role. Fang Ning was very startled when he saw himself, albeit in his other guise on the news site. However, that video was deleted almost immediately after the guy appeared on the site. Fan Ning saw that the video was only deleted now and figured it was put there to get the PR author's attention. The guy wondered, which made sense, that the falling meteorite had brought the system to more than just him. He plunged into reflecting on his good fortune and decided that his system looked reliable. Fan Ning was very upset because the world would never be the same again. Wang Hongdae lay on the table while the girl confirmed that it was the man she had posted online. After the lineup was over, the police allowed the girl to go. Zhao Ying was upset that the rich guy turned out to be a criminal, and the guy who saved her was now also considered a criminal. The girl remembered what the blonde man looked like, and she was sorry she wouldn't see him again. She was walking towards the exit of the building when she realized she never thanked that guy for saving her. After the girl left, the men in suits returned to Wang Hongdae's body. They were all standing not far from the table with the body, and everyone in the room could feel the tension. Some of the men began to talk amongst themselves, while the rest of us continued to pensively scrutinize the body. The guy with the glasses turned to Heiken to get to the truth. The man took his time getting closer to the table and the men around him. As Heichen walked tightly to the table where the body was, he glanced at it carelessly. After that, an eye in the center of his forehead began to open. And now all three of Heichen's eyes were examining the body. When the man's third eye opened all the way, light poured out of it. The light of the third eye was focused on Wang Hongdae's chest and studied the circumstances of this man's death. It all became clear to Heichen, and the man closed all three eyes and nodded his thoughts. There were a few creases on Heichen's forehead, but they could easily be mistaken for wrinkles. As the man remained silent long enough, Mosen asked him what he knew. Heichen explained that it was a kung fu technique, and at a very high level. The man came to the conclusion that it was one of those who had received power from the star who had done it, and he wanted justice. Heichen told the men that they could take it easy, and if they wanted to hire the guy as an F-class cleaner. All the men were visibly upset when they learned that the guy was at such a low level. Mosen explained to the other guys that Heichen's ability to get to the truth was amazing. That was why he ordered the other men not to argue with Heichen. Mosen ordered that a profile be created on this man called Quick A, but not to waste any time on him yet. Heichen left the group of men behind him as they began to discuss their work duties. Heichen was walking down an empty corridor of the building and said he wanted to meet a powerful newcomer, and it turned out to be nothing but a piffle and a waste of his time. Heichen stopped and looked around him carefully, and he noticed something. On one of the doors hung a sign that said Special Purpose Office. Heichen thought that the people in this department were very eager to get hold of their own superhuman abilities. However, no matter how many people they recruited, those people could not compete with those already trained. It was a normal day at first glance, but once again the blonde ordered the criminal to stop. The system easily held the perpetrator, pinning him to the sidewalk. Fang Ning's consciousness sat on the blonde man's shoulder. He told the system that this was the fifth criminal today. Fang Ning recalled the events of today and realized that more had passed in this day than in a month. The boy pushed those memories and thoughts away from him. They had done a lot today. And now Fang Ning understood why the system didn't want to work as a chef. She behaved in a chivalrous manner and tried to be efficient. Her main goals were to gain experience and money. After Fang Ning said those words, a small version of the blonde man appeared in front of him. The system grudgingly asked what he meant by saying such things. Fan Ning smirked at such a reaction from the system, and was about to explain to her. He said you just have to separate the tasks of making money from the tasks of gaining experience. Fan Ning asked the system if the only way to earn points was to catch a criminal. The system frowned unhappily but didn't say anything back to the guy. And after that, she disappeared right in front of Fang Ning's eyes. The guy was shocked. He asked the system to come back and not leave him and waved his arms in front of him. After that, the system reappeared next to the guy and recognized that he was right. She spoke behind Fang Ning and he had to turn around. It turned out that the system was limited to chivalry. Fang Ning was very pleased with himself when he realized that he had made the right conclusions. Throughout the day, the system caught the criminals and took the looted money for itself. But if innocents showed up, she'd hand the stuff over and run far away. Fan Ning suggested that the system develop a scenario for her and show her what it meant to be intellectually crushed. The system was interested in the lad's offer and ordered him to tell rather. Fan Ning said they could get the treasure, donate it, afterwards spread the word and stop criminals who want to steal it. The blonde frowned at the guy and considered his words for a long time. So they silently burned each other with their gazes. Fan Ning realized that this was the easiest way, and there were many harder options, but he felt that it wasn't worth the risk. After prolonged eye contact, the system gave its answer. It was categorically negative. Fan Ning was surprised when he heard him, but the system explained that they lacked the ability for such a plan. The boy was silent for a while. He tried to think of some other way out of the situation. Fan Ning said they must have some sort of system store, but the system said they didn't have a store. The guy wasn't discouraged and asked if they had a gift bag for newbies. The system opened one eye to look at Fan Ning and asked him what this prize package was. The guy held his head up and asked with hope in his voice if they even had a prize draw. The system got angry and started asking why Fan Ning thought that all good things should just get it. Fan Ning didn't reply anything to that. He sat down and decided to inquire about what the system even had in store. The blonde still looked disgruntled and pointed to the small pile of stuff behind him. Fan Ning silently looked at the money and some of the items they took from the criminals. The guy calmed down and asked what they had to do to create such a treasure. The system showed the notification that they needed level 5, 10 strength points, and level 3 blacksmithing skill. The guy read the terms and conditions of getting the weapon creation ability, and realized something was going to take a while. He remembered their recent fiery opponent. Then the strength of his body had increased by 1, and now he had only... In order to fulfill one of the conditions, you had to get 4 more points. Fan Ning paid attention to the forging skill and asked the system how to develop it. The system cheerfully explained that he would need to spend time and material, and everything would take place on the system's premises. Fan Ning asked if the place where they were now was system space, but the blonde man said that Fan Ning called this place the system backpack. Fan Ning asked the system if he could be in this place alone, and she proudly told the guy that she had blocked the feature for him. Fan Ning wasn't very happy about it, but there was still no way to influence it. So he asked what he could do now, and the system pointed him to the forge. Fan Ning walked into the blacksmith's house and began to scrutinize it. Everything looked like this house was straight out of the Middle Ages. There was also a fireplace burning inside. Fan Ning asked why the system couldn't do the top level right away. The guy couldn't believe that the system liked the very process of raising levels. The system wasn't happy, but it was silent, and the guy wanted to ask her something else. But he didn't have time to finish his sentence, because the angry blonde was already across from him, telling him that those were the rules. The system said it didn't know exactly why, but the world was about to get very dark. Fan Ning was startled when he heard this. He of course knew that things wouldn't be the same, but he was very sad to realize that there was no longer a future in which he would not be able to play in peace. An idea suddenly came to Fan Ning that seemed brilliant to him. The guy asked the system if he didn't deserve a reward for his obedience. The system realized that he was going to get something out of it, so it asked him what he wanted. Fan Ning started asking to make an internet cafe so that he could relax sometimes, but the system breathed out its annoyance and told him it would not be executed. The guy panicked and tried to think of a decent reason to create such a place. Fan Ning convinced the system that he was going to use the computer solely for good purposes. The guy offered a variation on how one would search the computer to find a job. The system suspected that he was cheating her and admitted that she could provide a cafe. But right now, the guy didn't have enough experience to connect to the outside network. Fan Ning became enthusiastic and urged the system to head out to fight for justice sooner rather than later. The guy said the system could show him his map and he would plan a route for them. And the system has to make sure they have some interchangeable outfits so they don't get caught in the city. Fan Ning also pointed out that they should somehow solve the problem of leaving fingerprints and DNA. He smiled victoriously and told me that he had learned all of this through the internet. The system looked unimpressed as the guy told her that without him she'd be in jail by now. Even though the guy's words sounded rational, the system felt like there was a catch somewhere. It was already late evening outside and only a few windows had lights on. Zhao Ying finally arrived home. She slowly walked into her apartment. After she closed the door behind her, the girl exhaled tiredly. The door to Fan Ning's room, who was her roommate, caught the girl's attention. He was never around when the girl was hoping for company. The guy was always playing games. Zhao Ying once again remembered the face of the man who had attacked her and realized that she wouldn't be able to sleep. The girl felt hungry, but there was no appetite, so she decided to just watch a movie. Zhao Ying was passing by the kitchen when the smell of food caught her attention. She walked into the kitchen and realized the smell was coming from the multi-cooker. The girl stepped closer to her and hurried to quench her interest and open the lid. When the lid was opened, she saw the food left for her, which smelled very good. It was late at night, and the lights were on in only one apartment in the entire building. The clock showed that it was already midnight when the boy reached home. He opened the front door quietly, trying not to wake his roommate. But when I entered the apartment, I was surprised to see that the light was still on. Zhao Ying looked out into the hall from her room and saw Fan Ning, who was standing still. She came out to him in her pajamas and asked if the guy had come home. She smiled sweetly at the guy and waited for him to turn his attention to her. But Fong Ning turned around to look at the girl, silently looked at her for a while. Then he left the surprised girl alone while he himself went to his room. Zhao Ying tried to stop him from talking and asked if he had prepared the food. The guy was already opening the door to his room when the girl admitted that she had eaten everything. Zhao Ying felt awkward and said that she was letting the guy use her groceries for the sake of such breakfasts. Fong Ning didn't look at the girl, but asked if she really enjoyed her breakfast. He then shifted his gaze to her and admitted that he wanted to open a breakfast cafe. He asked the girl if she wanted to join, and Zhao Ying looked at the guy in surprise. The girl immediately imagined what other delicious breakfast the guy could make and licked her lips. So she said that she would definitely agree to participate if the guy would cook such delicious dishes. Fong Ning started to go into his room and advised the girl to go to bed too, because sleep was important for the skin. Zhao Ying was surprised by such a comment. Her eyes were wide open and she began to speak. But the guy interrupted her when he told her that if she lost face, he would consider another roommate. Zhao Ying became angry. She folded her arms on her chest and frustratedly thought that he was looking to capitalize on her beauty. The girl dreamily recalled the image of the guy as he tidies himself up and realized he was handsome. Zhao Ying yawned and realized that she was tired enough for this day, so she started walking to her room, intending to get some sleep. The system locked itself in the room and the guy and said it had a solution to the fingerprint problem, and demonstrated to Fong Ning as his hand was covered in a transparent blue glow. Fan Ning looked at his body with interest and asked what it was. The system said it normally maintains a state of automatic defense around the body. Fong Ning realized that it would work like a protective film and would isolate him from other objects. The system said it's actually needed for defense against some poisonous enemies, but it's good for that purpose too. Then the system said what was left to avoid was bleeding, vomiting, or hair loss. Fan Ning immediately imagined how he would look if he cut his hair bald. The guy didn't really want to resort to that solution. He wondered why energy couldn't burn what was torn from the body. The system paused, pondering Fong Ning's words, because it would be really convenient. After some thought, the system said it might be possible to do something like this. After that, the system told Fong Ning that she possessed several different auras. The system focused, and the aura around it changed its color to red. She explained that it would just be a matter of switching them. One of the guy's hair flew off his head, and when it touched his aura, it began to burn. Fong Ning watched with delight in his eyes. It turns out that the problem had been solved. The guy wondered if they needed to open up an additional flow to control the perimeter. The system was going to work. But there was a problem with controlling it all. Fang Ning said that without a second person it wouldn't work, and the system immediately raised its hand and snapped its fingers right in front of the guy, and Fang Ning's doppelganger appeared in the room. The system explained that they needed a carpentry skill, but the doppelganger's skills were scarce. Fang Ning was still in shock that such a thing was even possible. And now his doppelganger was standing in front of him. It was a warm, sunny day outside. The birds flew quietly about their business. A long line stretched at the entrance to the small cafe. Almost all the people on this street were outside the building. Zhao Ying asked one of the workers to hurry up and submit the order for table 3. The men in line marveled that the girl had gone from salesperson to manager in just 2 weeks. The guest said that this cafe was a nice place and she wanted to tell her friends about it. The guy looked out of the line and asked Zhao Ying to expand the store as soon as possible. The girl smiled and said she couldn't make those decisions without her boss. Fan Ning was in the kitchen. He stood in his apron and prepared dishes to give people their orders. At this moment, Zhao Ying walked over to him. She playfully called out to the guy, calling him boss. She started spinning around in front of him and asking him if she looked good in that outfit today. The guy continued cooking and didn't even look at the girl much, but he said she looked good. Zhao Ying was upset when the guy reacted to her so indifferently. The girl walked over to the guy and hugged him from the back. She said that there was too little enthusiasm in his words. Zhao Ying kept one hand on the guy's shoulder and touched his stomach with the other. When that didn't work either, she pulled away from him a little and asked if she was pretty enough. The guy didn't even look at Zhao Ying and repeated the words about enthusiasm that the girl had told him. He put the towel he was holding the skillet with aside and took his eyes off the cooking. He turned to Zhao Ying, who was surprised because she didn't expect this from the guy. Fang Ning raised his hands as the girl continued to stare at him in surprise. And the guy started clapping with a neutral expression on his face and kept repeating that the girl looked good. Zhao Ying watched his actions and she felt uncomfortable with his behavior. She turned around and started to walk away from the guy. She told him he was terribly boring. Fang Ning's consciousness laughed hard because the girl had hit the exact target. And his body really is like a rock. Then the guy shifted his gaze to the 2 options that remained. In one, he was hitting on the girl, and in the other, he was saying he didn't care. Fang Ning was glad he chose the first option because it was the only one where he wasn't splattered with saliva to death. The guy asked the system if she had heard about that man's proposal. Fang Ning also felt that they needed to expand their business and open up an entire alley. The system rejected his offer and said that 2 hours a day for cooking was enough. Feng Ning was worried because the system had rebelled and was now ignoring him. The system continued to vigorously stir the specialty in the pan. All the right spices were added to the dish at once, and the cooking process itself looked incredible. It was as if the system was working magic right in the kitchen. Her movements were confident and smooth. The system was about to set aside the spice jars when I noticed 2 extra drops of sauce flying into the skillet. She reacted instantly, grabbing a spoon and hurrying to the pan. So the system easily caught the extra drips and kept them out of the dish. Feng Ning watched this and couldn't understand what was wrong with adding 2 drops more. The system closed its eyes and confidently replied that it would greatly affect the flavor of the dish. Feng Ning realized that this was giving him quite important information and smiled slyly. The cook poured the food into a small plate and said he added a different seasoning, so the flavor might be a little different. Zhao Ying was very curious to try it, so she took the chopsticks first. She ate some and said that although it was slightly different from Feng Ning's dish, it was still delicious. Cook also took some food and said that although he changed one material, it might have been good for him. Fan Ning was pleased with himself, he knew so, and so knew that the other chefs would be able to replicate the system's dishes if she gave the recipe. However, the system didn't support the guy's joy and said that for the time they lost, she would deduct from his vacation. Fan Ning crossed his arms on his chest and said that he remembered perfectly well that the system was in charge. The guy was in the system space that had been set up for him. It was almost like being in a room. The guy reached for the computer unit and thought he wouldn't have guessed his system was 2-part if he hadn't been watching it. He turned on the computer and remembered the system's words that she would deduct the lost time from his vacation. Of course, Feng Ning didn't have internet access yet, but he didn't need it for the first stage. Half a month later, the guy moved into his own apartment, which was close to the cafe. Feng Ning was anticipating how in the future, he would be the only one in the world to taste the best dishes of the system. The food was already on the table when someone knocked on their front door. Zhao Ying stood outside the door with a suitcase in her hands. She said hello and said that they hadn't seen each other for 2 days. The guy replied to the girl that he wasn't going to share his new apartment with her. And after saying that, he started to close the door. But Zhao Ying stopped him. She said that she didn't come for this. The guy opened the door again and went out into the hallway to the girl. And the girl revealed that she now lived in the neighboring apartment. Feng Ning was surprised that Zhao Ying was willing to move after him just for food. The girl smelled the delicious aroma of cooked food from the guy's apartment and pulled him aside to come in. She offered to eat together since he'd already made lunch. Zhao Ying walked over to the table and said that after the original, the fake didn't even want to try it. Their new chef wasn't bad, but the regulars were disappointed. But the new ones kept coming. Then she shifted her gaze to the guy and said she had news. Zhao Ying placed a stack of papers on the table. It was a commercial plan to find investors for their cafe. The girl was telling the guy that she had already found someone who was willing to cooperate with them. The system and Fan Ning silently glanced at each other when they heard this. And just a month later, they had a huge fansha restaurant downtown. Feng Ning rejoiced because this was their 8th successful point this month. He counted how much they had managed to make from their business this month, and the figure was huge. As much as 16 million in just 1 month. Feng Ning could hardly believe it, but he was happy. The wall clock said it was 8:30, and the system was still in the kitchen. She looked through all the spices she had to choose the best combinations. Fan Ning asked if the system wanted to cook some more so they could open a 9th restaurant. But the system was not interested in this, and so responded negatively. Then she said it had been half an hour and now it was time to practice. The system sat on the couch and meditated, and Fan Ning decided that things were going well for them even so. In front of Fan Ning in the system world, there were some materials lying in front of him. They had been bought in the real world, but they didn't have money problems now. When a small version of the system appeared beside the guy, Fan Ning boasted that he had done everything he had promised. The system told the guy that it now had a live chat feature, and expectantly, Fan Ning ran to his computer at the same moment. He quickly found himself at his desk and eagerly began to start up his computer. Using the mouse, the guy searched the desktop for the right icon, and finally he could click on the browser icon and launch the long-awaited internet. Feng Ning was very happy about it. Of course, he had waited for this for so long and worked hard. A small copy of the system appeared beside him. She reminded him that this function required a great deal of experience on a daily basis. Feng Ning smiled and said that his system was good, and they would definitely handle all the problems. The system only hummed at this and remained seated on the back of the computer chair. Fan Ning took the computer mouse in his right hand and immersed himself in the game. He was ready to cry with happiness when, after so much wasted effort, he could finally play. There was a meeting at the office of the Qicheng Special Services Department to talk about the current situation. 2 months had passed after the meteorite hit, and a group of awakened ones had appeared in Qi City. The service had collected data on these people over the 2 months, and were ready to address the issue. The man said it is difficult to categorize the awakened now, but it is possible to divide them ideologically. The former used the force legally. The second ones did righteous deeds. The third did not know how to earn, and the fourth relied on ability. The man concluded that they should support the former, restrict the latter, unite the latter, and fight the latter. The man switched the slide with an electronic pointer and a questionnaire appeared behind him. The questionnaire was about Fan Ning, who was categorized as first class. It was noted that its ability to improve the flavor of foods. The man told me that the guy created a special seasoning and became rich with it. But even after becoming rich, he continues to lead his normal life and brings no problems. Therefore, this man was a positive supporter of a social order from which there were no problems. That was why they had to secretly help the first type of awakened ones with all their might. Fanshi's restaurant was full of people as always. It was always like that in this restaurant. The system in its blonde image was also sitting in this restaurant, under the stares of people. Zhao Ying looked at the guy with embarrassment. In her thoughts, she called the blonde guy a god guy. The guy himself was eating quietly at his table and didn't realize he was being watched. The girl was very happy that the guy could appear in public in peace. Zhao Ying continued to look at the guy with a loving gaze and tried to understand how one could be so handsome. The girl remembered her boss's appearance but decided the blonde was much prettier. She made the decision to forget about Fang Ning and hit on the blonde man. Zhao Ying walked towards his table. As the girl got closer, she asked if her boyfriend would recognize her. In front of Fang Ning, a tableau appeared in front of him to choose a scenario. The guy was disappointed to see that all the options were stupid again. You could behave with the girl as if you were friends, enemies, or just ignore her existence. Fan Ning called the system to himself and said that despite the improvements, it doesn't change. He threw his head back and asked why there were no options that didn't sound pathetic. The smaller version of the system responded that they needed to save up rage. Fan Ning imagined that if they were in the game, they might have a scale for rage, and once it was filled, a super strike would follow. The guy said most of his thoughts out loud, and asked the system if it was true. The system said it was indeed roughly what the guy said. Since the system was now at level 10, the divine weapon was in the process of being forged. The system said there was a possibility of a very powerful enemy that could not compete with them. Fang Ning was glad that the progress was going so fast. His system was very diligent. But he wondered if such a hard-working system could handle the next enemy. Fang Ning realized that they had to fill up the rage scale in order to, if anything, defeat stronger enemies. The system explained that they could spend experience points to learn a new skill and move on to stronger techniques. But they needed to unleash the rage. Turns out you can get rage from humans, and at the moment their first rage slot is 70% full. The starting rage slot was 1, with another one given for every 5 levels, and they were spent on special skills. Fang Ning smiled as he realized how this whole system worked, and was surprised that he didn't know about it before. But now he could easily help the system accumulate a great many rage points. Fang Ning stood up from his seat and asked to let him look at his connections. The system brought up a list on one of his screens, and asked if that was what he meant. Fan Ning said that those 3 options would not be effective enough and offered to provide his own. The system frowned and was unsure whether to trust the guy with such an important task. The blonde man had eaten all the food he'd ordered, and now the empty plates were stacked high on the table. Zhao Ying felt a little annoyed, and thought that a guy's beauty didn't give him the right to think of her as nothing. She tried to address him again. She started to say something to him, but didn't have time to finish. She was interrupted by a loud shout from the side that called the guy her husband. The girl walked over to the blonde man's table and started asking him what kind of girl she was. The girl bowed her head and looked at Zhao Ying with a question in her eyes. The system alerted that anger was rising. The guy replied that he saved her once, and it turns out she works at this restaurant as a waitress. Zhao Ying was beginning to boil with anger, and the guy suggested his wife to eat here together. The girl kissed her husband on the cheek and said she was very happy that her husband loved her so much. Zhao Ying was in a quandary and tried to understand how she could have been mistaken for a waitress. The blonde man's wife looked at her and asked her, not to just stand there, but to get them some tea. The girl looked around the restaurant and decided that Zhao Ying hadn't gotten a good education. She looked at the waitress and said the girl could train on her own. Zhao Ying could barely contain her anger, but was able to thank her guest for her concern. The girl was brought her food and she took a small bite from her plate. She began chewing on the dish that was brought to her to taste. Afterwards, she said that although the food looks not as good as her favorite restaurant, it smells good. The girl said the portion was big for her and started offering the blonde to eat with her. Zhao Ying watched this family idol from far away and trembled with anger. The couple finished, and in the girl's arms, the guy left the restaurant under Zhao Ying's evil gaze. She stood in the restaurant and clenched her hands into fists to calm herself down a bit. Zhao Ying felt angry, annoyed, and a little depressed. Fang Ning laughed hard and thought that Zhao Ying thought too much of herself, and now got what she deserved. The guy's part was finished, and the system could handle the rest on its own. So he pulled himself over to the computer and was finally able to do his business. Fan Ning was playing at the computer when it was time to pay the girl for the introduction. Guy asked to wait until he was done playing, but the system didn't want to wait. Fan Ning was distracted from the game and asked what was so urgent. He saw a notice to pick a reward for the girl who was pretending to be their wife. It was a calm, sunny day outside, and there was a park not far from the restaurant. At this park, the couple stopped to decide on a payment. The blonde looked directly into the eyes of the girl across from him, but was in no hurry to say anything. The girl didn't take her eyes off the guy either, because she was waiting to receive her reward. Thus, they stood in the park opposite each other in tense silence. As the girl stared at the blonde man, she was reminded of how their first meeting had gone. The girl heard a scream. Someone was asking for the criminal to be stopped. She looked in the direction of the scream with interest to see what was going on there. And it was at that exact moment that a blonde man appeared on the roof next to her. The girl turned and watched as the guy deftly caught up with the criminal. She froze in place, scrutinizing the guy who quickly ran past. The blonde turned to her for only a few seconds. It was enough for their gazes to meet. The girl watched the scene wide-eyed. So she froze in the center of the street and watched as the guy quickly disappeared somewhere ahead. The girl ran to get to her home as soon as possible. When she finally got there, inside the courtyard, she noticed two familiar men. The girl was very excited and asked if their family had any connections to the special branch. Now she was standing in the park with this guy and said she was waiting for him to teach her martial arts. The girl crossed her arms over her chest and reminded herself that he'd promised to teach her how to fight. Fang Ning tensed up and remembered that this was the second option the system offered. The blonde man pulled out 3 books and held them out to the girl's side. He asked her to choose one of them. He said that as a fighter for justice, he always keeps his word. The girl was nervous and eyed the blonde man with a little suspicion. She read all the names carefully and reached out for one of them. The girl decided that the first 2 options looked difficult, so she chose the third. After she picked up the book, the blonde man began to approach her quickly, and she got scared. A stranger's hand suddenly touched her forehead. It was unexpected for the girl, but then she felt as if a warm energy was flowing into her body. It was like it was enveloping the girl. It felt very strange because it was like the energy was stopping in the chest area. After that, the blonde man took his hand away, and the flow of energy stopped. The girl stood opposite and continued to look at the guy. After that, the blonde turned around, leaving the girl alone, and started to walk away. She decided that she could trust him. The girl opened the book she had taken from the guy and looked at the pictures that were inside. The blonde man jumped up, leaving the girl alone, and she thanked him afterward. And then she was once again perusing the contents of the book her boyfriend had left her. The blonde was moving farther and farther away from the girl, and the system announced that the first rage scale was completely full. Fang Ning, you were very pleased with yourself when you heard this, and thought the anger of the 2 women was unimaginable. New cases were fine until the system gets them. It was already dark. The men continued to sit around the table and discuss their progress in martial arts. The man with glasses marveled at how many generations of the family had practiced martial arts. The other man nudged him and was convinced that their family was bound to become famous. The girl overheard their conversation and could feel herself starting to get angry. She passed close to the table where the men were sitting. She didn't hear every word they said. She thought that recently, there were people everywhere who had awakened their powers. Her family practiced traditional Chinese medicine, but after a special spiritual power, they were able to cure incurable diseases. The girl frowned and looked at her feet. She felt annoyed. Her hands clenched in a fist from the anger she felt at the injustice in her family. All because the family arts were only passed down to men. But the girl thought she was worthy too. The girl was quietly climbing the steps by the large closed doors. She was very tired from today and wanted to be in her room as soon as possible. But as she walked into the patio and was about to go into her room, she heard her name being called. Qian turned around and saw her aunt. The woman said that she had been waiting for her for a long time. The aunt asked the girl why she didn't contact Xiao Zheng. She said he wasn't a son, and the fact that they shared the same last name didn't matter. Auntie leaned closer to Qian and said that he was even willing to teach her martial arts once she married him. The woman continued to follow the girl as she walked away, and convinced her that this way her family would not be in need of anything. Qian finally reached her door. Her aunt saw that the girl wasn't going to follow her plan. The girl went into her room and tried to close the doors right in the face of her aunt, who was outraged at this behavior. Qian remembered about the guy and decided that not only was he lazy and ugly, he also had a mercurial and boring character. The girl closed her eyes and compared that guy to the blonde in her head. And though both had flaws, the blonde was much better. Qian opened her purse and started looking inside for a book. When she found it, she got it right away. She thought that the guy had given her difficult techniques on purpose. But she was still determined to practice, especially at night when no one could see her. The blonde stood on the rooftop watching Qian and filling the rage scale. Fang Ning thought that the girl really had a right to be angry because my gimmick seemed strange. That technique was different from the usual meditative cultivation method. It required one to bounce back quickly when performing it. The girl changed into gym clothes and started her workout in a small courtyard. She assumed the pose that was indicated in the picture and was doing jumping jacks. Her hands were under her breasts, as if supporting her from below. And despite her fatigue, Qian jumped quite high, observing all the techniques. Fang Ning wished he could have videotaped the girl's training session. Then he reminded himself that they hadn't come here to peep at the girl. He looked at the system and thought that there were fewer common criminals anyway, and they needed those powers. Suddenly the girl heard her name being called and looked toward the door in surprise. Standing in the aisle was her dad, who asked what she was exercising in. He looked around and noticed that it was very dark, so he asked why the streetlights weren't on. Qian got nervous and told her dad that she was tired of reading and decided to do a little dance. Her dad came closer and said they were going to ask for the lights to be fixed anyway, and they needed to talk. He told the girl that they were having a family meeting again tomorrow. Tsipin was surprised that he was being arranged again so quickly. The man said that the son of their clan leader was going to cooperate with the elders and release a strong pill. That's why they need funds from the family, and they also want to hire a clan member with great inner strength. Her father said that since it was time, she should get involved. The girl was very happy when she found out that her daddy had done this for her. Qian remembered this guy and was very happy that she could finally participate. Then the girl focused and realized that she just needed to pretend that this dance wasn't special. Her dad closed his eyes and said, "This world is changing fast." Fan Ning and the system continued to watch them from afar while Dad said that he'd better not rush into assumptions. Fan Ning asked the system if this person was telling the truth. The system looked at him and replied that she didn't know it herself. The system explained how storing a person's internal energy works, and that it would be difficult to help with a pill. The system also suggested that some herbs were used to neutralize personalities. After the system told him everything it knew about the subject, she asked the guy why he wanted the information. Fan Ning said, thinking afterward that they had been sitting still for days, and he suggested that the system would like to get involved. The system thought about what he said and recognized that it was true, so they made the decision to take a watch on the roof. Suddenly, a map notice appeared in front of them that showed the location of the accident, and they, too, hurriedly left to capture the culprit. This opponent was like an ant to them, but the system lacked heroic deeds. The next day, Fang Ning and systems were on the roof again, watching the courtyard from there. This time it was well lit, and there were a lot of people sitting at different tables. Xenia was having fun talking to each other about something and eating delicious food. Suddenly there was a notice on the map about 3 big dangerous targets, and the system headed for them. Pretty soon it found 3 guys. Fan Ning cheered the system up as she sat on her shoulder. The system jumped off the roof of the building, and the guy was suggesting to her how to defeat these opponents. He asked if the system wanted to use a long-range weapon, such as a handgun. Fan Ning told the system that open, so they always happened to be effective. But the system wasn't going to listen to him, because such behavior didn't befit a noble man. So the very next instant, the system landed in front of the 3 criminals ready for battle. The blonde man stood in front of the criminals, pointed at them, and began to say, "What are they charged with?" But none of the guys would listen to the end of it. They didn't turn around and started running away. Fang Ning told the system that he warned her about it. Well, there's a lot of criminals watching. After that, she rushed in pursuit, and Fan Ning said that if they can run so fast, they are unusual people. Already very soon, the blonde had almost caught up with the criminals, and the men were talking among themselves that they were being pursued by the very same knight. They realized they couldn't escape and he was catching up with them. So one of the men suggested splitting up. He ordered his friends to flee, and he himself was going to detain the blonde. That's why the 3 men split up at the first opportunity. Now the man was going to increase his speed so that the knight would follow him. And he hurriedly executed his plan, accelerating to the max. Thus the man ran non-stop for 2 hours. He began to slow down because the chase had gone on too long, and he thought he was breaking away. The man stopped. He leaned on his feet and tried to catch his breath. It was a long run, and the man felt very tired. The man was forced to dash again when he saw the blonde man appear behind him. He was running away and trying to figure out why this guy and how he wouldn't get away from him and how he was even here. Just when the man thought he had broken away again, a second later, he saw the blonde man chasing him through the water. The man turned around and shouted. He asked if the boy wanted to run after him until dawn. The man pulled out a small glass pill jar, sprinkled a single one on his hand, and threw the empty can as hard as he could at his stalker, and said he stole it. However, the blonde paid no attention to her and continued to follow the man. The man ran away and asked why he was chasing him if he had given the stolen goods. The man looked at the pill in his hand and realized that giving it up was the only way to escape. So he turned to the blonde and threw the pill at him. The boy rushed to catch the pill, and the man, wasting no time, ran further away. The man jumped over another fence and hoped to finally get away from the blonde man, carefully landed on the ground on the other side, and decided to take a break. He stood up again to catch his breath and thought that now the guy had to get away from him. The man hadn't had time to get a proper rest when he heard sounds near him. It was the blonde man who was already approaching him at full speed. The blonde was completely serious and wasn't going to back down from his intended goal. The man looked at the approaching guy with fear on his face. He started running again and asked where the other 2 had gone. He called and ordered me to come and help him escape the blonde man, but the men were not going to help him. They said he had told himself that the night would never catch up with him. So they advised the man not to stop and keep running something you were doing, crying as he ran away and asked his partners to help him. He was ready to give up his leadership status, but his partners weren't going to help him and resigned themselves to being caught by the Special Cases Bureau. Afterward, the man heard them drinking to the fact that he was a good guy. The man wept and came to the conclusion that he had exhausted the patience of all men, and his luck had deserted him. He remembered how he always ran away from the teacher while she ran after him with a ruler, and how he ran away in any situation where he might have been in danger. But now that he was being stalked by someone like the blonde man, there was nothing he could do. Fan Ning watched the man and said that he was good at running away, but he was unlucky to meet the system. He tripped and started to fall. He just wanted to get his level up with the pill. After such a long run, his strength ran out and he couldn't run anymore. The man collapsed right in the road. He realized that the blonde man was right behind him, but he couldn't move at all. The man tried to accept that this was his end. He calmed down a bit and thought that maybe this ending wasn't so bad. Then he noticed the blonde man in front of him coming closer and closer to him. The man was terrified, but all he could do was lie there. The system looked down at him from above, inspecting him in parallel. When the guy got very close, he grabbed the man by his shirt and started lifting him off the ground. The man tried to speak to the blonde man, but it was no use. The man watched as the blonde swung around to strike him. And the next moment he was flying away from the guy, so strong was the blow. The man's body flew to the window of one of the stores, and with a clatter it fell right on top of him and the apple boxes. The man had lost the creature. All his clothes were covered in apple residue. There was a lot of crushed fruit all around. Fan Ning looked at the man and said that it must have hurt a lot. Then the guy shifted his gaze to the system and thought she had to be mad. The system had never caught anyone for so long before. She reached over and took the man's wallet. Then the blonde man opened his wallet and took out some bills. He left them at the apple stand, to the toll of the destroyed stand, and they left. The man was still sitting under the kiosk covered in apples and was unconscious, when a car pulled up to the area and illuminated the man with its headlights. Many cars and people in dark suits appeared on this street. The men were all frowning and extremely serious. They were all getting out of their cars. A man in a suit approached the unconscious man and began handcuffing him. After that, the man was shackled to his legs as well. One of the men said the man's name was Lu and his nickname was Flying Squirrel. The men were carrying the beaten perpetrator to the car, and two men nearby were watching from the alley. These men were Lu former partners. One of them was glad it had worked out, and asked the man what they should do now that they had escaped from Lu and those employees. The man said the brat got what he deserved, and now he's not causing trouble. Niu Shi said he couldn't record the entire chase in its entirety because their motorcycle ran out of gas. The man said they could make some gas money when they sold the tape. The employees rode in their cars back to the office. They wondered why the Knight had been chasing the man for 4 hours. One of the guys remarked that he was very tired of even just watching this chase. The man behind the wheel said he expected something like this from Knight. The third man laughed and said that this Lu was unlucky to meet such a determined opponent. But now old man Zhang finally has some fresh blood to work with. Morning came, and they arrived at the headquarters of Chicheng's Special Affairs Department. When the car pulled up to the guards, the driver showed them his pass. Seeing the pass, the guards let the car into the territory of the rehabilitation center. Lu was riding in the car with a bag over his head. He could hear someone outside the window repeating numbers repeatedly. A column of men in identical uniforms ran through the office area. They were shouting that they had to protect people. The run continued, and the man hummed a song about enjoying freedom and life. Lu was taken out of the car and the bag was removed from his head, while his hands and feet were still handcuffed. The man thought that once he got out of here, he would find the Knight and get revenge on him. Lu thought that rehabilitation here consisted of not the most pleasant methods. Suddenly a man appeared in front of them, and his attendants greeted him and called Director Zhang. They introduced the new student to him, which was Lu and the principal adjusted his glasses with interest. Lu looked back at the men running and realized that they would lose themselves after graduating from here. He didn't want that to happen to him. Principal Zhang asked what happened to the guy's face. Was he really another victim of the Knight? The workers confirmed the principal's hunch with smiles, and they said that running away from the Knight was a bad idea. But Principal Zhang felt that the Knight also needed to be re-educated, and they were wrong to let him do whatever he wanted. One of the employees didn't quite agree with that. He said they didn't even know roughly who he was. And the second worker said the Knight even left money for the destroyed stall. Director Zhang lowered his head and said that Knight had caught 723 criminals in the past 2 months. And during that time, there were 8 instances of overprotection of Knight. The principal asked if he remembered everything correctly, and the employee smiled at him when he said the principal had a great memory. And that's why the director, that such a person's case should be referred to the Special Investigations Unit. The man said the Truth Department had already evaluated his abilities and found him not too helpful. But Director Zhang was sure that at some point they would regret today's decision. He told the workers that he was taking Lu'er away and they could come back for him in 3 months. The men bowed to the principal and thanked him for his efforts. After that, the workers left the center, and Director Zhang went inside. Lu'er clumsily walked behind him. The chains on his legs would make it very difficult for him to walk. Lu'er was trying to figure out why the chains were so short, and how people even walked around in them. Director Zhang looked back and saw Lu'er following him with difficulty, so he created some sort of strange clot in his palm. And then he threw it toward Lu'er, and used it to break the chains on the man's shackles. Lu'er looked at his freed hands and couldn't believe it. It was now clear why this particular person was central to the rehabilitation process. Principal Zhang smiled as he watched the man and let him live normally for a little longer. Fang Ning held a pill in his hands, which actually had body energy sealed within it. The guy was familiar with the feeling because the system was constantly changing his body for righteous deeds. He brought it closer to his face and realized that no one knew what effect the pill would have. Fang Ning remembered Father Qian saying that the pill would be freely available, but it really wasn't. It was too expensive and hardly anyone would be able to buy it. The guy tensed up when he suddenly heard someone's laughter. It was very strange. He looked around, trying to keep his cool, but he kept hearing a voice that came from nowhere. Fang Ning was very frightened and shouted loudly that there was a ghost here. The guy was trembling all over and went under the table to seek shelter. He asked him to stay away from him. Fang Ning decided that these voices were coming from the direction of the blacksmith's house. He plucked up his courage and decided to go and see what it was. He came out of his room and ran to the smithy. The boy was scared. He opened the door and started looking around quickly. After he found nothing, the guy hurriedly hid in a small hiding place. There he summoned a panel and began typing something rapidly on it. Then his little copy appeared on the shoulder of the system, and he noticed that it would soon be dawn. Fang Ning asked the system if they were being chased, and the system answered him in the negative. The boy exhaled in relief and thought it was a very good thing he'd been scared for nothing. But then the system smiled lightly and said that they were not persecuted in this world. Fang Ning grabbed onto the system and fearfully began to ask what she was talking about. The system turned to the guy and told him that a wandering spirit could only confuse a person, so there was no point in attacking. Fang Ning excitedly asked the system when this ghost would be able to harm a person. The system said it depends on many factors, but if you consider their case, about 2 months. Fang Ning glanced at the wandering spirit beside them and asked if it would bring them trouble in the future. Fan Ning learned that there really were ghosts and demons in the world. The guy exhaled and admitted that despite his lifestyle, he too was worried about the world. The wandering spirit was angry that she was being ignored and crept closer to the system. The spirit had a woman's shape. She said he wouldn't be able to get rid of her like the rest of the losers. After that, her body began to take on a more defined shape, and she was about to pounce on the blonde from behind. The blonde stood with his back to the ghost that flew to attack them. The wandering spirit was right behind them. Her eyes were burning red and there was dark smoke all around her. Fang Ning watched in horror as he was about to attack them, but the system remained calm. The system used her new technique and a golden dragon emerged from her hand. The blonde man launched that dragon straight at the wandering spirit with a single flick of his hand. It was a very strong attack that staggered the girl, and she was never able to attack. From the outside, the impact in the form of this dragon looked like a very bright glow. The man who saw such a thing from the balcony rushed to run away from there just in case. The system balanced on one leg as it stood on the antenna. There was darkness all around, but within moments the clouds began to part and the sun began to light up the city. Fang Ning was happy to watch as the wandering spirit's charms were dispelled. After this fight, a report of the fight appeared as usual. It turned out that the ghost's name was Ju Sanmei. Fang Ning saw that defeating him only earned them 50 points, and realized why the system didn't want to fight. And then the guy asked the system why she spent an entire charge on a ghost, even though she wasn't planning on fighting. The system said that Fan Ning was very good at getting on people's nerves, so she decided to test the skills. They moved to the blacksmith's house to continue their conversation there. Fang Ning unhappily sat on the floor and thought that he was hated precisely because they needed rage. The system said they now had enough points to fill a special ability of their sky weapon, and asked which feature would attract more opponents. The guy said it must be eternal youth and immortality. That's what people wanted from the beginning of time. The system agreed that the guy was right, but they didn't have the right components, so that option wasn't an option. Fang Ning folded his arms on his chest and said, "Then that leaves either longevity or extreme strength." The system agreed that it would be easy, but they couldn't grant them extraordinary power. Fang Ning agreed that if their power increased dramatically, there would be no point in creating weapons. So they settled on the longevity option. The system said it would handle it within a few days. The system asked what would be the best way to make weapons, and the guy suggested adding Western and Eastern elements. And since gold has always been combined with treasure since ancient times, it was necessary to make it golden. The system listened to the guy and agreed with his idea, then proceeded to build the weapon. At a glance, it was an ordinary neighborhood. If only a loud scream could not be heard coming from one of the houses. There was a small piece of wandering spirit in that house. The man was very angry that he had spent 3 years on the spirit, and now she was almost destroyed. Ju Sunmei said that she was sorry, but the opponent was very strong. She said she had never seen such a skill, and it was impossible to evade. The man was angry that Feng Niao had already given him his information about the knight's abilities. He turned to the spirit and asked why things had escalated into a fight if he had ordered to just follow him. Ju Sanmei admitted that she wanted to test his skills for her master. When the man heard this, he screamed. He angrily asked why she had done what she had not been asked to do. After that, the man calmed down a bit and told the girl that he would treat her only 3 days later. The man walked over to the box and began to close the spirit in it. He said she had better follow orders. The man slammed the lid shut and heard that Ju Sanmei might not last that long. But in spite of this, the man took no action to save the spirit. The man pondered everything that had happened and made his way down the stairs. He walked over to a small altar that had been set up in a small, poorly lit room, and the man began to prepare the altar for the ceremony. He lit sticks of incense and bowed with them before the altar. After that, he lit the candles and put the sticks in their place. When the little ritual was completed, the image of a guy appeared in front of the man. The guy asked, "What's the man's progress?" And Guiki admitted that he hadn't made any. The smile disappeared from the guy's face, and he asked what that was about. The man knelt in front of the image of the guy and listened intently. The man bowed and said that his spiritual servant had been fatally attacked. This would slow down their plans. The guy told the man that his spiritual servant was a very skilled professional, and then said that ordinary awakened individuals would not be able to defeat the spirit. Guizi said that his clergywoman acted of her own free will and caused the conflict. The guy calmed him down by telling him that this is a common problem with spiritual servants. They do what they like all the time. The man bowed to him once more and gave him a few compliments. The guy laughed and said that Guichi was really good at compliments. After that, the one that was intended for his spiritual servant appeared in front of the man. Guy told Guichi that he had to treat her fairly to remain a fair person. The man sat on his knees, handed over, and promised that he would remember his master's instruction. The guy said that the truth department had already abandoned the web, so it was time for them to say goodbye. Lastly, he asked Guichi to be careful and not to give in to greed. The man bowed one last time. After the guy's silhouette disappeared, he took the pill in his hands. He looked at her cheerfully. The man laughed at the boy's words, but he had to play along, because there were many advantages in cooperating with this man. Fang Ning and the system were sitting not far from the blacksmith's house. They didn't speak to each other. A ringing could be heard from inside the house because the sword inside was forging itself. While they waited, each was thinking about something else, and they didn't even look at each other. Fan Ning was bored out of his mind, sitting like this waiting. The guy was upset that he wasn't even allowed to play to pass the time somehow. So he decided to pull out his phone and flip through it, looking at the recent news. The news said that all of Japan was covered in fog for 3 days, and the authorities issued a warning not to visit Japan. Feng Ning thought that it was quite strange that there was chaos everywhere, and his city was completely calm. After that, the guy left the phone and relaxed and lay down. He thought that staying at home wasn't so bad. He only had to worry about food and play, and that suited him. Meanwhile, Principal Zhang was telling the disciples that they still had a lot to learn from Feng Ning, because the one used his ability to make money legally and is sitting at home unlike them. Luer didn't appreciate such an example from the principal, and thought this guy was a pathetic, cowardly homebody. The principal said they were here to realize their mistakes, not to realize that abilities don't put them above the rest. Afterward, he suddenly turned to the new kid in their class. The principal asked him to stand up and share his abilities and offenses with the rest of us. Luer got up from his seat and started saying that he was wrong, even though I don't really think so. He said he should have used his speed not to commit theft. On the contrary, he should have used it for peace and joined the national team to lead their country to the Olympics. He said he was completely remorseful for his actions and had changed for the better, and promised to be a better person from now on, when really he just wanted to leave this place. Director Zhang said that only awakened individuals would soon be able to participate in the competition. Therefore, Luer had to train harder if he wanted to participate. The man nodded and said he would work hard not to let the country down. Principal Zhang said then they would end the lesson at this point towards the exit. But before leaving the principal Mellum assignment to write an essay on the topic, what is true happiness? The whole class responded to Principal Zhang with a chorus of agreement. The director stopped when he heard everyone answer him in agreement. Afterward, he said those who performed well could call their families. Luer was glad that he could finally call his traitor. There was an outcry in one neighborhood that the other brother was going to run away from there. Luer's former friends talked to him on the phone. The man said that the preparations were not finished, and Luer was very angry and said that from now on, they were no longer brothers. The man on the other end of the wire asked how many more times he was going to break up their fraternity. He said they weren't able to save him, but they were able to get a decent recording of what happened. Luer was promised to send a video, and 20 minutes later he called his partner again. He apologized to them for thinking badly of them and asked them to send him money. It was lunchtime at their rehabilitation center, so the canteen was full of people. Luer picked up some food they had for sale in their canteen and enjoyed devouring his food little by little. But then the screen suddenly started showing various exquisite and seemingly very tasty dishes. Most of the men in the room shifted their gaze to the television. The screen showed Fan Ning eating different dishes with great pleasure. Luer recognized him as the guy the principal had mentioned so often. This made the man very angry because even when they ate, they kept getting them. Luer promised himself that when he left this center, he would have a table just as posh. The guy sat at the table, rage replenished by unfamiliar names. All 3 scales were completely filled. Fan Ning cut off another piece of meat that smelled just fine, putting it in his mouth and savoring its flavor with pleasure. When the guy finished, he thought those guys in the re-education department were mad at him again. Re-education workers put up cameras in his restaurant. Fan Ning allowed them to do so that they could draw a clear line between and night. A good addition to this was that it helped replenish rage resources. Therefore, such a move played well into the hands of both sides. While the boy ate, he thought it would be a good idea to practice. Fan Ning finished his meal, leaned back in his chair, and stroked his stomach, and was very happy that he had eaten well. His entire course of meals cost between $70,000 and $100,000, and if you include breakfast and 3 meals a day, all $300,000. The guy looked at his arm and thought that the system had set up such a diet to strengthen the body. At the rehab center, it was time for training. They were ordered not to stop, or they might not get their lunch. Luer was diligently doing push-ups along with everyone else. He was already quite tired, when suddenly one of the employees called out to him to pick up the money. Luer the suitcase that was in the guard's hands and couldn't believe that there was only money in that suitcase. He overheard a conversation between 2 men who were doing push-ups not far from him. They discussed that they spent all their money on better food, but now they have no one to ask. Luer went to collect his money, and rejoiced that he had such wonderful brothers outside. The man was already mentally anticipating how he would be able to have a proper meal. Luer walked over to the constructor and loudly reported to him. After that, the instructor allowed Luer to take his suitcase for himself. Luer settled down on the ground to open his suitcase as soon as possible, and a whole crowd of onlookers gathered around him. With deft and quick movements, the man opened the suitcase on the sports field. Inside the suitcase, however, disappointment awaited him. Almost all the space was taken up by a warm jacket and a couple of bills on top. Luer wanted to cry in disappointment that he was only handed 1,000 yuan. What was even more frustrating was that the canteen was too expensive, and he wouldn't have enough for even one meal. The house Ma Da and Niu Shi lived in was no different from any other house. Niu Shi admired that the men not only gave money to Luer, but also put winter clothes. The guy said that even though they lost their parents and Sanmei, they still had a boss. Ma Da said that this center will take care of his nutrition, but probably won't think about things. Niu Shi agreed with the man that it was best not to mess around with the cold in Qi City. Niu Shi said that now that they had bought so many clothes for Luer, they won't be able to buy meat. Ma Da said they won't be able to commit the crime, because the night is still waiting for them. So the decision was made to look for some clean work. Knight stood on the roof of one of the buildings and scrutinized the map of the city. Unfortunately for him, all the criminals decided to lay low and he couldn't get experience. The system really wanted to find valuable criminals like last time. Fan Ning sat his small room in the system space at his computer. He was free to play the game as long as he wanted. He looked up guns he liked and saw that they were worth at least $3,000. Suddenly he got a text message asking him where he was making money now. President Zhao, one of his chain's franchisees, had written to him, so he started typing a reply. President Zhao wrote to him about the miracle cure and that he was invited to a meeting. Fan Ning realized that he was being invited by the same Qi family for dinner. Fan Ning told the system his plan and asked how he felt about it. And the system liked that the guy had already considered the circumstances of the injury, and he was proud of his progress. Fan Ning realizes that they will need to go there in his real form to buy the medicine, but realized they would need some sort of replacement for his body in case of unforeseen danger. The system listened to everything he said and silently considered how to get out of the situation. After the system said the idea of creating a mechanical doll suited them. They were in the system world, and Fan Ning was looking at an exact replica of himself in a white suit. In front of the guy was a mechanical doll with things like hair, nails, and even the texture of dandruff replicated. Fan Ning smiled at his copy and thought that he made a fine, handsome man. Perfect disguise, long-term control, and medium-level conversation abilities were available to this doll. The system showed up in Fan Ning's room, and the guy said he was delighted with the result. Since his blood was used in the creation of this doll, he asked the system where it came from. The mechanical doll disappeared. The system explained that since his health was fine, they were storing some in case of serious injury. Fan Ning praised the system for such foresight and said that he himself had not even thought of it. The system was proud of himself and said that his considerations were now more complete than the guy's. And after that, the system said it also took a piece of liver, intestines, some lung masses, and 1 kidney. Fan Ning realized why he didn't feel an increase in strength despite the nourishing food. The system admitted that it was only able to take a little bit of tissue from the heart as well, and wouldn't touch the brain at all. The system was also contemplating taking one of the guy's testicles, but since the system knew how reverent people were about this organ, and decided to ask first. Fan Ning wondered why the system didn't ask when it took away other parts of his body. The system said it has noticed that the guy is mostly reclusive and only spends time at the cyber cafe. And since the guy's not using the organ anyway, the system could start backing up. After saying that, the system asked if the guy was okay with it. Fan Ning looked rather gloomy, and after gathering his strength began to speak. He said that as a former programmer, he should thank the system for its efforts. The system was happy to hear the praise in its direction and was proud of itself. The system said that because the guy eats well every day, he feels good even with one kidney. Fan Ning gloomed again. The system's intentions were now clear to him. Sure, his actions made a fair amount of sense, but it was hard for the guy to accept it. He decided he couldn't let the system do whatever it wanted to his body. Fan Ning asked if the system was afraid that changing his body parts would affect his internal processes. He said he was worried it might cause a decline in his abilities. However, the system didn't let him finish and told him it was impossible. The system explained that the power doesn't grow on the outside but inside the tissue. Plus, he could always put the organs back in place. Fan Ning asked if she was storing all of his organs in the system space. He asked the system why he hadn't seen them before and if it was safe there. The system explained that it had created a separate area for this, where time does not move, so the organs would remain fresh. After that, the system again asked to pick up one of the testicles to freeze. The system was close enough to the desired organ and asked if the guy agreed. The one shouted his disagreement so loudly that the room they were in began to shake. Fan Ning thought that they wouldn't solve this matter with ordinary talk. Then he looked down and realized that one of his testicles was missing. He covered his groin and asked the system how he's going to have kids now. Fan Ning all on the floor and cried. He was upset because he didn't agree. The system still took his testicle. The system said it had informed him, but it wasn't going to listen to his opinion, and afterward told the guy that losing one testicle would have no effect on his male characteristics. Fan Ning sadly exhaled, and had already almost resigned himself to the fact that he wouldn't be able to get his testicle back. But then a brilliant idea came to him that could help him get a part of himself back. He asked the system if it remembered the original purpose that caused them to create the doll. The system thought only of not touching his visible organs, forgot that there was perceptive vision, and thus someone might associate Fan Ning with the night because of this flaw. The system convinced him that as long as the night wasn't exposed, there wouldn't be a problem with that. Fan Ning asked what they would do if there was a person with discerning eyesight there. The system went wide-eyed when it heard this because it hadn't considered this scenario. But then she frowned again and told him to stop talking nonsense. If a person like that was there, they wouldn't have full proof. Fan Ning heard the system's tone become more somber and thought it was strange. It was as if she had emotions. Eventually, the system gave up and agreed to take it all back. The system got frustrated because it spent a lot of time on it, and now it's all for nothing. The system promised Fan Ning that it would eventually get his consent and it would happen again. Then the system transferred the missing organ to them and returned it to its host. Fan Ning felt relieved when his testicle returned to him. The guy suddenly realized something and called out the system. He told her that they hadn't wasted time, but had learned a useful skill. The system asked with interest what benefits this might bring them. Fan Ning asked the system how long it took to transfer a body part into system space. The system thought for a while and answered that everything happens very quickly in seconds, maybe even milliseconds. Fan Ning smiled when he heard this and said that it was really great. The guy figured they could use it to move his body in case of a life-threatening situation. The system listened to this kind of assumption from Fan Ning, and after that, they had a new skill. It was at a low level and could only protect them from open attacks so far. The system told Fan Ning that they had the ability to raise the level of this ability, and if they succeed, this skill could be the most useful of all, and serve as their ultimate defense. This technique only transferred the organs they wanted to hit, so the guy asked why not transfer it completely. The system explained to him that the only organ that was dangerous to carry was his brain. The guy agreed that there was no way to reschedule him in that case and got serious. Fan Ning was glad that they had a trump card in case they were badly injured. The most important thing was to not hurt his head. The system considered the guy and agreed that the skill was very useful to them. She didn't really want to admit it, but her master was smarter than he seemed at first glance. The system then turned to Fan Ning, drawing his attention to itself. The system reminded them that their doll was only capable of fooling normal humans and normal tracking technology. But Fan Ning said that they shouldn't worry about it. It wouldn't give them any serious problems. The system wanted to say something else she was worried about, but the guy wouldn't let her finish. Fan Ning said that he came up with an ingenious technique and thinks he should be rewarded for it. The system got close to the guy and asked the guy what he wanted. Fan Ning asked if the system would be able to apply its knowledge to create a pair of artificial legs. The system turned away from the guy and asked if he wanted to be a cyborg in the future. But Fan Ning was in no mood to lose any part of his body. unless the system did it without his knowledge. The guy asked for a simple answer as to whether or not it was possible to make artificial legs. The system said it was possible. However, if they are for another person, they will take a lot of energy. Feng Ning knew that it would cost a lot, but realized that this was his only chance to persuade the system. Because any other time, there's no way she'd agree to do that. So the guy declared with all his determination that he wanted the award. The system looked at him, and the guy asked, secretly reattaching another person's legs. The small house was located on the outskirts of Chi City. The surroundings were quiet and dark. There was a small lamp in the yard of the cabin that helped illuminate the area. There was a bedspread on the floor and some vegetables lying on it. A man in a wheelchair slowly headed there, exerting a lot of effort. When he finally got to the vegetable place, he reached for a tomato. The vegetables were on the floor, and it was difficult for the man to reach it on his own. But he still tried his best to get it. Fan Ning watched the man from the bushes not far away from the house. The system asked the guy if this was the person they were here for. She also said they would need the man's blood for the legs to take root. Feng Ning was determined to finish this quickly. Considering the system's abilities, it was easy. But then they noticed some woman coming out of the house. She called out to the man and asked what he was doing in the yard again. A woman saw a tomato in the man's hands and asked him to let her take care of it. But the man told her it was okay, and she was going through enough hardships because of him. The woman smiled at him and told him not to talk nonsense. She had lived a great life by his side. She started crying over the unfairness of the world, and said he didn't deserve this. Feng Ning watched this from his hiding place, and couldn't hold back his tears either. The system asked if they were ready to do it right now as intended. But the guy asked to wait with that for a while and started wiping his tears. The system said he was very fickle, and asked if these people were his parents. Feng Ning noticed that he was 28 years old this year, and the woman was younger than 40. Meanwhile, the woman was telling the man that their savings would be enough to order him dentures. The man turned on her and asked where they got the money from. The girl told him that all this time they had been sent money by a student who was being helped by a man. Recently, the amounts have gone up, and they have closed all their debts and can now save up for dentures. The girl admitted that she didn't talk about it because she was afraid the man would give the money away. The man said that all the people he was training had already graduated from universities, and doubted they could have sent money. He asked the girl to return the money if they had a problem. The woman said she didn't believe it at first either, but she has a picture of him. She brought out a photo and gave it to the man in the stroller. The photo showed little Fan Ning. The man was looking at it and saw the signature in the corner, and then he recognized the guy. He thought back to the day he had first met this boy. It was a long time ago. It was winter and a man was driving a truck on the highway. But the man had never been to this area before and couldn't find his way around. He saw a guy walking alone somewhere along the road. So the man stopped and got out of the car. He approached the guy and asked for directions. The boy didn't look very healthy, but told that the driver would see the village after 10 minutes of the road. Fang Ning wanted to tell him that there was a good hotel at the entrance, but he couldn't finish because he started sneezing. The man noticed that despite the extreme cold, the boy was lightly dressed. So he went back to his truck and asked the guy to wait. From the car, the man got a warm jacket and threw it over the boy's shoulders. The man smiled at the boy and said he was leaving him the jacket as a thank you. The boy looked very surprised, as if no one had ever done that for him before. The man looked at the photo with a smile and said the guy was the same, only without the jacket. He wanted to say something about good deeds, but got a punch in the neck. The girl was frightened and didn't realize what had happened, but very quickly she also received a blow. Thus, the man and the girl found themselves unconscious in the patio of their home. Fang Ning was angry because the system had once again failed to listen to him. The system was in the guy's body, and she said it was starting to tighten up. And since they wanted to get it over with quickly, they had to hurry. The guy walked over to the man in the wheelchair and sat down on his knees in front of him. The only source of light was still the old lamp over the porch of the house. And while no one could notice them, the system was installing artificial legs on the man. When she finished, the man's legs were in place. Fang Ning was very satisfied. The system said they had to expend quite a bit of life energy and experience. But then came a notification that shocked the system and the guy. The notice said the guy got a morality module and permanent power points. After they finished helping the man, they returned to the system world. Fan Ning asked why there was such a scale in the world in the first place, and the system was trying to get the guy to remember if there was anyone else he wanted to thank. Fan Ning was angry and said that in his case it was impossible. The memory of someone taking care of him in the cold winter was the warmest of his childhood. Fan Ning tried to understand why the system was so excited about this discovery, so he asked about it. The blonde rubbed his hands together in anticipation, said that you usually had to accumulate fame to unlock the reputation module. After that, you had to become a hero and upgrade the system to level 50, and they managed to get it now. The only downside was that morale points were much harder to earn. Fan Ning asked what would happen if he used strikes from the rage scale and morality scale at the same time. The system cheerfully said that the impact would be not just increased in power. The morality scale works for those with even a crumb of evil intentions, and spirits will be easily defeated. Since Fang Ning was afraid of spirits, he would be very happy about this fact. The guy was finally relieved that he had solved a problem that had been bothering him for a long time. He turned to the computer and said that now he could play and read novels in peace. The guy was very pleased and smiled broadly, while the system watched him grudgingly but remained silent. The system thought that after this, the guy would stop screwing around and get smart. Therefore, she reminded the guy about the Chi family feast they were invited to. Fan Ning quickly looked at the blondes and said that they didn't have to be there now. The system realized that he sadly wanted to go there and get the cure to try and help his benefactor. So the system snapped its fingers and shut down the internet. Since Fan Ning's game depended on the internet, he was unable to continue playing. The guy was really angry because he was about to take over an entire city. Fang Ning glared angrily at the system, hoping that it would give him his internet back. But since the system wouldn't even look at him, the guy gave up. He turned away from the computer and said he would go out of his way to show up in society. The system was satisfied with that answer and gave the guy his internet back after all. Fan Ning turned around to the screens and saw the connection to the game had been restored. During this time, the guy had already lost. People in the chat room decided that the girl had turned off his internet. Yi Fang Ning unhappily read the comments and thought that it had better really be a girl. As evening fell, the guy arrived at the meeting place and adjusted his tie before entering the building. He saw the people around him. He thought he should have brought Zhao Ying with him. When he called her to come with him, she said she couldn't because she was studying English. The girl was determined. She wanted their cafe to become an international chain, so she listened intently to the text in English on her headphones. She tried to translate what the guy said, but she couldn't do it that fast. Fang Ning was confident that the girl could do it within a month, and he thought that he himself had learned English fast enough. He walked into the luxurious building, extended his invitation to the employee. The man bowed politely to him and asked the guy to pass on. Fang Ning Youth was wearing a very expensive suit, so people were expressing their admiration for him. He found himself in a restaurant room full of people. Very soon after he was there, he was called and greeted. The guy turned around and saw a couple of a young girl and a grown man in front of him. That man was President Zhao, and they shook hands in greeting. Fan Ning shifted his gaze to the girl beside the man and asked him who it was. The president introduced his daughter Liu Yao. He said that she turned 20 years old this year. President Zhao put his arm around the guy's shoulder and said that he was much better than most people his age. The girl looked at the guy and smiled sweetly at him. Afterwards, she said hello politely. Fang Ning blushed with embarrassment, but said hello to the girl in return. President Zhao said that he arranged it so that they were sitting at the same table. All the people towards me were in expensive suits and waiters were serving wine. President Zhao sat next to the guy and said that he was very happy to meet Fang Ning at this party. They chatted politely with each other, and the guy thought the man really knew how to behave socially. Their conversation was interrupted by someone else's voice. He spoke unpleasantly about Fang Ning, which attracted the attention of their table. The boy looked at the man who was saying these things, and he saw a young arrogant guy in front of him. Fang Ning turned gloomy. He did not like this person at all. The guy sitting in the system space decided to watch through Liu Yao's monitor reaction. The girl sat quietly and didn't even pay attention to the guy who appeared. Fan Ning thought that the girl looked good, and getting married wasn't a bad idea, especially if he can continue the lifestyle he's leading now. The system distracted itself from the meditation and said that the marriage mode would be unlocked after the 100th level. President Zhao called the guy Chi Tao. He said that he couldn't treat guests like that. Chi Tao said that he could speak like this in case the person was useless. Fang Ning was surprised that this person called him useless when the rehabilitation center put him as an example. He looked at this arrogant guy and wondered what he had done. President Zhao said that the department maintains peace in the whole country, so the Chi clan may not interfere. Chi Tao looked at the president and asked if he really wanted to take a chef as his son-in-law. President Zhao said that the guy is an awakened person and an experienced foodie. However, Chi Tao continued to ridicule him and said that even if he was a chef, he wouldn't be able to create a masterpiece. President Zhao and his daughter felt uncomfortable as they listened to such words from Chi Tao. Fan Ning looked at this guy. He wondered who he was if he allowed himself to intrude into other people's conversations so brazenly. A system appeared next to him and said that they couldn't get much anger at this evening if their scales weren't full. Fan Ning was unhappy that they were being humiliated, and the system didn't even pity him. However, the system said that getting insulted was even good for them. Fang Ning was sure that this person was worth quite a few experience points, and the system confirmed his words. She showed him the map, and the guy was marked with a huge bright orange sphere. However, because she wasn't red, it was against the rules of the system to interact with him. Fan Ning realized that the guy was doing bad things, but he can't apprehend the criminal unless he's in the process of committing a crime. After Fang Ning thought about it, he realized that it all felt like a game. He asked the system if a person attacked him, would that be considered a threat? The system seriously replied that whoever threatened him would immediately become enemy number one. A smirk appeared on the guy's face, and he ordered the system to keep a close eye on the map. After that, Feng Ning began to attract the attention of President Zhao and Chi Tao. He took a few steps forward and then began to fall into the president's arms. Feng Ning was lying on the floor, and President Zhao was trying to bring him to his senses. Liu Yao looked at him worriedly, while her father tried to see if the guy was all right. Fan Ning said that it was very hurtful to be insulted for no reason. His hands were shaking, and he asked to be sent to the hospital soon because he needed to see a doctor. Chi Tao didn't care about this performance, and President Zhao was calling for help. And the moment Chi Tao left the guy in trouble, he began to glow red on the map. The system noticed this and got seriously pissed off at this horrible guy. The ambulance was traveling fast through the night city to the hospital. Inside it, Feng Ning was riding inside it. He had an oxygen mask on his face. He was also hooked up to a machine that showed his heartbeat, and to all other necessary medical devices. Doctors were examining the guys and trying to figure out why a healthy man fainted. President Zhao and her daughter were in the ambulance with the guy. The doctors thought the shock might have triggered an underlying heart condition, and the boy listened sullenly. After that, a joyful system appeared beside him and began to quickly ask how he was able to do it. The guy smiled and said he was sure the system had never looked deeper into the rules. He asked to give up control of his body for a while, and the doctors continued to examine him. President Zhao felt sad for the guy and thought that he had apparently never been in such a situation, and Liu Yao hoped that he would be all right. This was the first time someone fainted because of her. Meanwhile, the evening organized by the Qi family continued as if nothing had happened. Chi Tao was standing in the corner talking to one of the waiters when Chi Ye approached him. He called Chi Tao by name, drawing his attention. He said he had been told what had happened and asked how things really were. Chi Tao said that nothing special happened. He went over to exchange a few words, but the cook fainted. Chi Ye told the guy that he didn't care how big he was. The guy was well aware of his interlocutor's true essence. These words made Chi Tao angry. He shouted that he wouldn't be afraid of someone because of this. But Chi Ye said that no matter how worthless he thinks the other people are, if he is here, then he is a guest. Chi Tao listened that he should treat guests with respect, and then began to speak calmly. But he soon switched to shouting, and told Master Qi not to forget that if it wasn't for his grandfather, the medicine wouldn't have existed. Chi Ye tensely thought that the guy himself had nothing to do with this, but he remained silent. Fan Ning was brought to the hospital and put in a room to rest and recover. The system world in the system world was already anxious to hear how the guy was able to turn that man into a red dot. Fan Ning sat across from the non-blonde man in the chair. He noticed that the system wasn't this agitated even after opening the morality scale. The system said that with this technique, they could easily nurture the right and monsters. Fan Ning admitted that when he called them worthless, he literally attacked their identity. The system didn't fully understand where the threat was there because if attacked, it could easily defeat it. The guy strained to look at the system and realized that it really didn't understand. He moved closer to the blonde and said that the guy had tried to kidnap their fiancée and called useless. And this person had great potential, so he could easily already cripple them when he got stronger. Fan Ning said the system will use low-level bosses to help him advance through the level. However, if they were attacked by monsters with great strength, they would have a hard time. But the system still didn't understand how the guy changed color. Fan Ning laughed and said that was it, because the system didn't understand hidden settings at all, so only the guy himself could use them for the purposes they needed. The system was surprised to hear that he did it by obsession. Fan Ning that because of his paranoia, his psyche sees real evidence, causing the system to make Chi Tao an enemy. Listened to his explanation and realized it made sense. The blonde man stopped talking and began to think hard about something, and the boy thought that the system really wasn't very smart. Fan Ning did have a mania, but not at all for stalking, but for playing games and reading novellas. The guy became serious, and thought that they had actually better get rid of Chi Tao. Otherwise, it might have been a problem. A notice came back saying the obsession had gotten worse. 3 more times, then it would stay forever. The guy looked at the blonde who was still considering something. Fan Ning decided to call him out and asked him if he still underestimated the power of novellas. The blonde continued to look serious and thoughtful, and only hummed in response. The system was then forced to find out that there was a huge gap between their intellectual abilities. Guy recognized that the system had made a tough decision, and he wondered what it meant. The system said that from now on, when there's a problem, it would let the guy deal with it. Feng Ning felt embarrassed that the system called it a really hard decision. The system allowed him to do whatever he wanted in the cyber cafe, as long as he got more ideas from games and novels that way. Fang Ning looked down at the blonde man and asked if he was sure. Suddenly the guy won't have time to deal with their problems. The system's response was simple enough. In that case, it would simply disconnect the internet. The guy was indignant and asked what if he just couldn't solve some problem. However, the system's response was the same. It would simply disconnect the internet connection. Fan Ning thought it would be cruel, and asked what the blonde man would do then. The blonde confidently answered him that he would raise monsters and train. The boy tensed when he heard about monsters and training. He wondered if that was all he could do. The guy remembered that day with the meteorite. When he fell and passed out, he was playing some bad video game at the time. It's most likely the system that came out of that not-so-good game. The system showed the map and noticed that Chi-Tao's point was almost black. The system asked if they were going to continue to just wait. Fan Ning said that this guy was an unusual target, so they needed to gather more information. So the system decided to shut down the internet so the guy wouldn't be distracted while he came up with an ingenious plan. Fan Ning was not happy, started yelling at the system because he needed the internet to gather information. The system looked at him and told him that all he had to do was ask the blonde man. A window appeared next to the blonde man after snapping his fingers here. Fan Ning looked at all of this and said that the system was just awful. The system noticed that someone had sent a message. It was from a hummingbird, offering information about Chi-Tao. They read the message and looked at each other while they decided what they were going to do about it. The knight quickly moved through the night city towards Chi-Tao's location. When he got to the right place, he saw a guy doing something to a girl. Chi-Tao held his hand over the girl's chest, and the girl looked like she was feeling ill. If you looked closer at the girl's face, you could see that her mouth was bleeding. Chi-Tao saw the knight and was glad that he had finally come to him. The guy left the girl's body lying on the ground and began to walk closer to the knight. Chi-Tao decided that Feng Ning had hired a knight to take revenge on him. The boy gloomed and asked the knight if he really thought revenge was a righteous deed. Fan Ning said that this person was just teasing and was trying to piss the knight off. The system agreed with the guy. Fan Ning asked if she could handle it. The system said that he was only threatening her with words, and Fan Ning wanted her to let him go on playing. The blonde decided to let the guy go, but on the condition that he would show up if he was needed. Fan Ning joyfully returned to the system world and sat down at the computer. Chi-Tao got angry when he saw that his words had no effect, and started shouting that he didn't like it when a victim died without emotion. He said it wasn't fun at all, and spirits began to appear from his back. His eyes burned blue, and he let all the spirits out of his back, and said the knight would be the same. Those silhouettes left Chi-Tao's body. They flew away to attack the knight. They circled around the blonde man, and were about to attack, but then changed direction. They flew behind his back and lifted two men in suits into the air. They then let them go to the ground, and the men fell with a thud. The knight's face didn't express any emotion. It was impossible to understand what he was thinking. After that, they started coughing violently, blood flowing from their mouths. The men looked at their palms, which had blood dripping onto them as they coughed. They were very badly frightened because blood from the mouth clearly couldn't be something good. Chi-Tao was delighted when he saw the frightened faces of those men. He shouted that humans are funny toys that change their emotions quickly. Chi-Tao shouted at the men, whether they were Feng Niao's men or someone else on him. One of the men said they were not enemies, just spies. No one hired them. They are just gathering information. Chi-Tao said that if they were hostile, they wouldn't have survived. Chi-Tao thought that their play needed an audience, so the guys were lucky. Chi-Tao said that the knight has a strong body, and he has killed many strong people. The knight continued to stare at him with a blank expression. And the guy was telling me that he liked to look at strong emotions. Chi-Tao said that since the knight wasn't afraid, he would have to show him what fear was. And the guy started releasing more silhouettes from his body. They began to surround the two men and the knight, each with a different emotion on their face. They tried their best to scare the knight, but he didn't react in any way to what was happening. So they came close to him. He felt no fear. The men were talking to each other. They couldn't believe they were going to die on their first mission. The man tried to reassure his friend and said that the blonde would die first anyway. But it didn't work because it made it even scarier and the men cried. Chi-Tao couldn't believe his eyes and became very angry. He didn't understand why wasn't the knight afraid. Feng Ning said that out of all four people, he was the only one who wasn't scared, so it was time to destroy the monsters. However, the system was in no hurry. She wanted to see what else Chi-Tao had in store. Fan Ning was very scared, and he admitted that he was afraid of spirits, so he wouldn't be very helpful. The system was not very happy about it. She said that in that case, she would make the first move. So finally, the knight shifted from his seat and ran forward. Very soon, the knight was already beside Chi-Tao and was about to strike. Because the guy wasn't expecting it, the attack on himself hit right on target. Chi-Tao of such a blow flew backwards, and his hands began to turn into smoke. The knight heard electricity begin to run through the ghosts from above. The knight stood surrounded by a huge number of ghosts, and he heard Chi-Tao's voice ordering him to find him. Fang Ning was really scared, and he decided that the system had messed everything up. The knight began to concentrate the power in his hands, and they flashed yellow. The blonde man began drawing a circle with his hands. He planned to deliver a particularly powerful blow. So the knight created a golden dragon and sent it to attack the ghosts. The golden dragon's body passed through the ghost bodies with ease, and they, shrouded in the golden aura of the dragon, began to disappear from this world. Therefore, the dragon easily found the real Chi-Tao among all these ghosts. The guy found himself on the floor and couldn't believe his plan had failed. He quickly got to his feet and asked the knight how he had managed to find his true body. Chi-Tao didn't know why his metamorphosis didn't work, but he wasn't going to die here. Suddenly, strange changes began to happen to his body. It grew uncontrollably. His clothes were torn, and light could be seen through his skin. Chi-Tao didn't know what was happening to him. After that, the guy exploded because of the golden glow that was trying to escape. The knight and the men in suits watched as only small pieces remained of the guy. Fan Ning said that the guy had long been marked purple on the map, and it was easy to find him. They received 75,000 points for this battle, and were able to level up to 11th level. They also completed the first morale scale. The system smiled victoriously and said that, as promised, it handled it in one motion. Fan Ning did not, though, admit that the system was quick and easy at all. But then the guy realized they had let one part go and it was bad. The system looked at the place where Chi-Tao used to stand, and asked, didn't he, the guy, die? Fan Ning folded his arms on his chest and said that they had broken the dragon, and now they wouldn't be able to use it. The men in suits moved closer to the knight and began bowing to him and thanking him for saving their lives. The knight looked at them and ordered them to bring him the things that were scattered around. The men were very exhausted today, but they couldn't refuse the knight. So they headed out to look for important items at the scene. The man was telling President Qi that the mission was accomplished, so he asked for the rest of the payment to be deposited. President Qi recognized that the information was flawless and said he had to spend 50 million. The man held out his hand and said that the knight himself had helped them get closer to suppressing him. President Qi said he would double the remaining amount. He had better not break the rules. He added that he doesn't want to hear about any more trouble from outside. The man laughed and said that they had already spent all the money, and it could be considered that everything went downhill from that point on. The man wondered if President Qi could sell them some information. They could deduct payment from the price of their information. President Qi stood up from his seat and asked the man what information he wanted. The man said that the knight had killed Chi-Tao, so they wondered what Dr. Qi Yunshin would do to take revenge. The man said Qi Yunshin pampered Chi-Tao, and plus this old man had quite a few connections. President Qi said that even such a gifted doctor couldn't operate on himself, so they would meet soon. The man laughed at this answer and said that it was not for nothing that people called him a magnanimous ruler. The man kept his seat and said he was cutting the fee in half for that information. President Qi asked the man if he was going to use this information to tie up the knight. The man corrected his glasses and said he wasn't going to share how he was going to use her. President Qi said that after this case, the information needs to be updated a little bit, and the man agreed to share it with him for free. He said the Truth Department people were completely wrong about the knight. At first they thought his power level was F, development limited, but now they've changed their minds. He was a noble personality and had a level B. He often cheated rogues and was good at martial arts. Since his name was unknown, he was called the Knight or Hero of Qi City. The president thought it was too loud a nickname. He thought it was a strong weapon in the hands of a man, and the man laughed in response and said that the president was really smart. The man said that he heard the Beauty and Qi family was quite close to the knight, and even learned some martial arts. The man said that with such an advantage, he could easily catch the knight. President Qi believed that the man was not going to give him such a valuable item. The man was once again convinced of the man's intellectual abilities and asked to stay away from him. The man decided to share some free information, and told that the eyes of a knight penetrate to the deepest depths. President Qi said that he was always fair and honest with his actions, so he was not in danger. The men looked at the president incredulously and told him that self-confidence is always a good quality. It was decided by the men to stop there today. So the man hurriedly left President Qi's office. As he left, he said that they should wish each other happiness. President Qi silently escorted him with a glance and wished he would leave his office sooner. Fang Ning was about to leave the hospital room and blamed Chi-Tao for having to pretend. When the boy left the hospital, President Zhao called him. He was waiting for him by the car. Fang Ning was surprised that President Zhao hadn't lost interest in him after what had happened. His daughter was also in the car, and the guy didn't understand why they were being so protective of him. While he was in the hospital, they often came to see him and brought him soup. And even though the flavor wasn't perfect, there was a genuine sense of caring put into the food. Fang Ning regarded Liu Yao, who was sitting in the back seat looking out the window. The guy was very happy that he could still hope for marriage. We'd have to wait for the 100th level. Unexpectedly, President Zhao asked Fang Ning how he was feeling. The boy awkwardly said he had let his anger take over, so he passed out. He thanked the man for his concern. President Zhao said that the doctor found no problems with his body. The man asked to teach him how to eat properly. Fan Ning happily agreed and invited them to a banquet at his restaurant. They drove quietly along the road. The atmosphere in the car was great. The president gladly agreed to come to the banquet. The system wasn't happy because the guy invited people to a banquet, and the system would have to cook. Fang Ning began to strongly beg the system to help him once too. He tried to convince the system that two people wouldn't eat much. The system noticed that Zhao had a wife who would also come to the banquet with them, and she eats more than her husband and daughter. Fang Ning was glad that the system was subconsciously gathering information about the future mother-in-law. Then the guy offered to help raise another strong monster. But they didn't have a need for it, but needed to fill the rage scale. The guy said they defeated one ghost, but a whole legion is still scary. He thought 3 rage scales weren't enough. The system told him that spirits were not to be feared, not worth it. Humans were more dangerous because they ran out of rage quickly. The system said that using 1 skill per person would be effective, but fighting them for 4 hours would be foolish. Fan Ning agreed with the system and decided that they needed more rage scales. The system prompted the guy to think of a way to trigger the hidden settings. Fan Ning said that he would definitely think of something to get more rage scales for battles. President Zhao dropped off Fang Ning and said goodbye to him cheerfully. When President Zhao got back in the car, he asked his daughter what she thought about the son-in-law he had chosen. The guy fainted at the banquet, which was embarrassing enough, but it showed he wasn't conniving. President Zhao assured her that once she tasted his food, she would fall in love completely. Yao Yao said that she knows her father and mother are worried about her and only want the best for her. The man couldn't hear her words over the loud car engine and asked her to repeat her words. The girl was surprised to hear this, but she said her father was right, and the man praised her for it. Meanwhile, Fan Ning was in his system cyber cafe. The guy sat in his chair and strained to think how he could get more rage. After a while, he admitted to the system that he could no longer think and had a headache. The system recognized that it wasn't that easy and offered to help her own with the preparation first. Fan Ning asked the system, wasn't she going to put off thinking about problems? The system waved its hands and said it didn't think about them. Put it in front of the guy to find the answer. They heard a notification. The system said some information in Knight's online profile was received. It turns out that the Qi family won't retaliate against them because the grandfather passed away due to a heart attack last night. Feng Ning recognized that without the information Feng Yao had given them, they would have failed. He also hinted that someone from the Qi family wanted to kill Qi Tao. The only thing that bothered the guy was that they still didn't know who the customer was. The system said it was you, the clan leader's son. He and the president of the pharmaceutical group gave them that information. The guy looked at the system and remembered that they were still good people to her. Fan Nina, the tense thing was that the plan was amazing, and there wasn't a single clue anywhere. A guy came into one of his restaurants, and all the cooks and waiters lined up in a live corridor. They were all waiting for special guests to arrive at the banquet. And finally, President Zhao and his family came to have a good night you at the restaurant. The guy started walking towards them, saying he was glad to see them. He wanted to say something else to them. The system threw him out of his body, and the sentence was left unfinished. Feng Ning asked that it wouldn't be a problem to return him to his body, but the system thought that there might be an accident. The system asks the guy if there's anything other than ghosts and spirits that he's afraid of. The guy was embarrassed, and admitted that he was actually afraid of a lot of things. For example, some animals and killers. The system said then the guy should get ready because something might have scared him. The system activated a new esoteric skill called Spirit Gaze. It gave the guy 30 minutes of true vision. A small purple streak appeared on Feng Ning's eyes, which improved his vision. The boy was very frightened and screamed loudly. He was so scared that his hair was standing on end. And he hurried to the blacksmith's cottage to hide in his little hiding place there. The guy was sitting under the table, shaking with fear. He thanked the system and said he didn't expect this. Next to President Zhao was a white, huge snake. It was standing where the president's wife should have been. She towered over the guy and she had huge fangs. And she said hello to the guy as if nothing had happened. The system sent the guy a notification that Mrs. Zhao's true form was a snake demon and he had to make a choice. The first 2 options are a loss for the guy, and only the third option kept everyone happy. So, of course, Fang Ning was the third option and prepared a delicious meal for everyone on his own. Mrs. Zhao enjoyed sampling the culinary delights we had prepared by Chef Fang Ning. Liu Yao also enjoyed tasting the small fire-roasted pig. There was a huge variety of dishes on the table, and all the guests enjoyed the flavors. Fang Ning brought a new delicious dish to the table to please his guests even more. President Zhao felt awkward because of how rich and abundant Fang Ning had treated them. No matter, and his wife and daughter began to glare menacingly at him to keep quiet. And the president had to relent and ask the guy to keep going because they liked to eat. Fan Ning picked up the baked jacket and was about to put it on the table. Having to carry a plate of chicken didn't make it because it was ripped in half by the women at the table. After that, the guy placed the dishes for President Zhao on the table. Those who took the sticks and were going to savor the flavor didn't have time. In a moment, his plate was empty. His wife and daughter had already eaten everything. The president was very embarrassed and asked the guy to ignore it because the girls were just being cranky in the family circle. Fan Ning said he was very pleased that they treated him like family. The guy went back to the kitchen to deep fry the meat and serve it to his guests. He was calmly cooking when President Zhao walked into his kitchen. He was upset and asked the guy if he felt uncomfortable at this dinner. The boy silently consisted and looked forward, here pondering the president's words. But in fact, the system was actually reversing them at that moment. It put the guy back in his body. The system said that the snake demons weren't there right now, and he could chat with President Zhao. Feng Ning didn't really want to come out of his hiding place, but he didn't have much choice. So he turned to the president and laughed awkwardly. He tried to reassure him that everything was fine. The guy asked the president if his women had awakened the ability to consume massive amounts of food. President Zhao said that he knew the cook wouldn't be upset, so he didn't stop them. They both always complained that the food wasn't good enough for them, and this was the first time he'd ever seen them have such a good appetite. President Zhao admitted that the kid's culinary skills were beyond his expectations. Fan Ning was embarrassed and said that the man was just too kind to him and he had room to grow. The man admitted that a few days ago his wife told him about the abilities, so he offered to tell the guy about it too. Fang Ning approached the man in disbelief and asked if he was sure to tell him. President Zhao put his arm around the guy's shoulders, laughed and said that he was already like part of the family to them, so of course they would tell him. The man glanced around nervously and checked that it was just the two of them in the kitchen. The president said that it was all about the fact that the mistress was descended from a dragon princess, and so it was their normal appetite. The president said that his daughter also has dragon blood flowing in her, but she is too young to awaken. The boy remembered Miss Zhao's real appearance. He was surprised that the dragon looked exactly like a snake, but the man regarded that look from the lad differently and decided that he didn't believe him. Fan Ning hurriedly assured the man that he was proud of the man and that he could see how much they loved each other. President Zhao smiled widely and told the guy that he was good at choosing words. He patted Fang Ning's shoulder and asked him not to get proud in the future. However, after Fang Ning found out who Liu Yao was, he didn't want to marry her at all. The guy felt awkward and said he was just a homebody with little culinary ability. Suddenly, a system appeared behind him and said that something strange had just happened. She showed the guy a map. There were 3 huge green dots on it. The strongest of the Zhao family was exactly Madame Zhao. Fang Ning looked at them with interest and noticed that they were all good people. The man noticed the guy's hiccup and started asking if he was tired and if he was okay. The man began to reach out his hand to Fan Ning, and the guy's true peace returned. A notice appeared in front of the guy that he was at the beginning of an important phase and had to make a choice. The first 2 options again ended disastrously badly, while the third offered to delay an important decision. Naturally, the guy had no other option but the third. The man noticed that Fang Ning was flying in the clouds again. He thought it was the man's way of regaining his strength. The boy took on a thoughtful expression and told the man that he had heard that it was best not to marry before the awakening of the bloodline, since marrying before awakening can lead to a decrease in the strength and purity of the bloodline. The guy admitted that he couldn't hide this information because it wasn't fair to Zhao's family. President Zhao was grateful to Guy for telling him this, and promised to talk to his wife. Thus at dinner they sat up till nightfall. Their meal was already over and Mrs. Zhao sat at the table and listened to her husband's story. When President Zhao finished his story, he looked at his family and waited for their reaction. His wife smiled slightly and said the guy passed the last check as well. Therefore, it was decided to leave things as they were for now and return to the matter when Liu Yao's powers awakened.